Story 1.
My husband posts online about me sometimes. He calls me his dead weight. He's not wrong. I'm sitting in this wheelchair right now, listening to him move around the kitchen, and the only thing I can think is that he's right. I am a weight, a burden, a bill that he has to pay for the rest of his life. And the worst part is, I'm the one who rang up the debt. For 25 years, my entire world was him and the kids. I was a wife and a mother. That was it. I packed lunches, I went to soccer games, I hosted holidays. I built our life brick by brick, and I was happy with it. Or I thought I was. When our youngest left for college, the house went quiet. So quiet it hurt my ears. I'd walk from room to room and feel like a ghost. I'd spent so long being mom that I had no idea who I was supposed to be without them. My husband, bless his heart, is a fixer. He saw I was sad, so he tried to fix it. Let's get a puppy, he'd suggest. Let's book a cruise. He was trying to fill my days, but he didn't see the real problem. The problem wasn't my schedule. It was me. I didn't have an identity anymore. I was just the person who used to raise his children. Getting the job at that real estate firm felt like coming up for air after you've been held underwater. Suddenly, I was a person again. I had a desk. I had a name tag. People asked for my opinion. And then there was Mark. He was a coworker, just a guy from the office. But he saw me. Not as a mom, not as someone's wife. He saw a woman. He'd ask about my day and actually listen. He told me I was funny. He told me I was smart. His attention felt like sunshine, and I was so cold and had been in the dark for so long. I know it sounds pathetic. A middle-aged woman getting weak in the knees over a compliment. But it was more than that. It was like a drug. I started dressing up for work, doing my hair again. My husband noticed, but he just laughed. He'd joke about my new college lifestyle when I'd stay out late for drinks with colleagues or text with Mark about a listing. He had no idea what was really happening. He didn't see that I wasn't trying to be young again. I was trying to be a person for the very first time. One night after a few too many glasses of wine, I said something awful to him. I told him he was dimming my light. The hurt on his face still haunts me. It was cruel, but in that moment it was the most honest thing I'd said in years. I felt like a plant that had been kept in a closet, and Mark had opened the door and let the sun in. The affair was the worst mistake of my life, but for a few months it felt beautiful. It was a secret world where I was the main character. It wasn't even really about Mark. It was about the woman I got to be when I was with him. I was exciting. I was desired. I was alive. I was flying, and I didn't care that I was flying straight into the ground. I knew deep down that it was all fake, a fantasy built on lies, and that it would all come crashing down eventually. And it did. It crashed down in the booth of a cheap diner about 40 minutes from our house. We were meeting for lunch, and he leaned over and kissed me. It was just a small kiss, but in that moment it felt like freedom. Then I looked up over his shoulder and saw her. My daughter. My baby girl home from college for the weekend. The look on her face, it wasn't anger. It was disgust. It was like she didn't even recognize me. In her eyes, I saw what I really was. Not some vibrant woman finding herself. I was just a cliché. A selfish, cheating mother who was breaking her own child's heart. The fantasy just popped. Mark disappeared. The diner disappeared. all I could see was my daughter's face. I ended it right there. I walked out of the diner, got in my car, and called my boss to quit my job. I drove home in a daze. When my daughter got back, I begged her. I cried and I pleaded with her not to tell her father. It was the most cowardly thing I have ever done. I took my poison and forced her to drink it to carry that secret for me. My only thought was that I had to protect my husband from this. I convinced myself that if I could just hide it, I could fix it. I would become the perfect wife again. I would atone for what I'd done. For 2 years, that's what I did. I cooked. I cleaned. I threw myself back into the role I'd been so desperate to escape, hoping that if I loved him hard enough, it would somehow cancel out the betrayal. Then came the car accident. It wasn't my fault. A drunk driver ran a red light. I remember the sound of the tires, the shattering of glass, and then nothing. I woke up in a hospital and my husband was holding my hand, crying. The doctor told me the damage to my spine was permanent. I would never walk again. It felt like a sick joke from the universe, a punishment that fit the crime. I had crippled our marriage, and now my body was crippled too. My husband became my nurse. He bathed me, he dressed me, he carried me to bed. His care was so tender, so absolute, and every kind touch felt like a hot poker on my skin. The guilt was eating me alive. I felt so worthless, so broken. One night I told him he should find someone else, that he should sleep with other women. He looked at me like I was crazy. He didn't understand. I wasn't trying to push him away. I was trying to tell him I didn't deserve his loyalty. I was damaged goods. A year after that, I found the lump in my throat. When the doctor sat us down and used the word mass, my husband started to cry again. But I didn't. I started to laugh. A wild, hysterical laugh that I couldn't stop. The doctor looked alarmed, but I knew it made perfect sense. All the lies I had swallowed, all the secrets I had kept, choked down for years, they had finally festered. They had turned into a poison growing inside me. This was it. This was the final payment. For years, life went on in our quiet, broken way. Him caring for me, me hating myself, and my daughter watching us both holding the truth like a grenade. I could see the toll it was taking on her. Tonight is our anniversary. He made a special dinner. My daughter came over. She's been drinking more than usual. She's quiet, staring into her wine glass. And then I see it. A look in her eyes I haven't seen since that day in the diner. The look of something shattering. She gets up from the table, her movements unsteady, and walks over to where her father is sitting on the couch. She takes a shaky breath, and I see the tears welling up in her eyes. I feel the air leave my own lungs. I know in that one heart-stopping second that my time is up. "Dad," she says, her voice thick and slurry, "I have to tell you something." My husband turns from the TV, a soft, tired smile on his face. The kind of smile he saves for her. "What's up, kiddo? You okay?" She shakes her head, a single tear tracing a path through her makeup. "No, I'm not okay. I haven't been okay for a long time." She points a trembling finger at me. At me, sitting in my stupid chair, unable to move, unable to run. Because of her. The air goes still. My husband's smile fades. He looks from our daughter's face to mine, his expression confused. "What's she talking about?" he asks me. I can't speak. The lump in my throat, the one the doctors are so worried about, feels like it's a living thing strangling me from the inside. Ask her where she was, my daughter chokes out. Ask her what she was doing when she was working at that real estate place. Before the accident. He turns back to me, his brow furrowed. Honey, what is this? And that's when my daughter finally says the words. The words she has carried for years. The words that have been my death sentence, just waiting to be read aloud. She had an affair, Dad. I saw her. I saw her kissing him. The silence that follows is the loudest thing I have ever heard. It's a physical thing pressing in on my eardrums. My husband just stares at me. There's no anger yet, just a blank, uncomprehending look. He's trying to process it, trying to fit this new piece of information into the puzzle of our life, and it just won't fit. The picture he's known for 30 years is being ripped apart in front of him. Is she telling the truth? He asks. His voice is quiet, dangerously quiet. All I can do is nod. A tiny, pathetic movement of my head. But it's enough. I watch the understanding dawn on his face, and it's like watching a man die. The confusion drains away, replaced by a wave of pure, agonizing pain. He actually stumbles back a step like he's been physically struck. His eyes, the kind brown eyes I fell in love with, turn to stone. He looks at me, really looks at me for the first time in years. Not as his wife, not as his patient. He looks at me like I'm a stranger. A monster. All this time he whispers. The words are barely audible. He looks from my face down to my useless legs, then back up again. His face twists into something I've never seen before. It's not sadness. It's disgust. Pure, undiluted disgust. All this time, I've been bathing you, feeding you, carrying you, for what? He takes a step closer, his voice rising. I gave up everything for you after that accident. I felt sorry for you, and you let me. He's shouting now, and our daughter is openly sobbing in the corner. You let me sacrifice my life to take care of a liar. A cheat. He laughs a horrible broken sound. You told me to sleep with other women. Was that your guilty conscience? Trying to even the score? I try to say his name, but my voice is a croak. He crouches down so his face is level with mine. I can smell the wine from dinner on his breath. You are used, he hisses, his face inches from mine. A broken used thing. And I'm stuck with you. He stands up and looks down at me, at my body trapped in this chair. You're nothing but dead weight. My dead weight. And I know he's right. That's the most terrible part. He's saying everything that I've been thinking about myself for years. I deserved it. I deserved every single word. He didn't leave. How could he? I can't even get to the bathroom by myself. He is my jailer, and I am his prisoner. The house that was once my refuge is now our shared cell. The weeks that followed were a special kind of hell. The silence came back, but this time it wasn't empty. It was full of hate. He still takes care of me. He's a good man after all. It's his duty. But the tenderness is gone. When he lifts me from the bed to the chair, his hands are rough. He doesn't look at me. His touch is clinical, the way a nurse would handle a patient they dislike. He prepares my meals, puts them on a tray in front of me, and walks away. We live in the same house, but we haven't had a real conversation since that night. The only sounds are the television and the whir of my wheelchair. Sometimes late at night I hear him crying in his room. He moved into the guest room down the hall. The sound of his grief is a knife in my heart. A constant reminder that I didn't just break his trust. I broke times him, asterisk. I murdered the happy, simple man he used to be, and I replaced him with this hollowed-out ghost who shares my address. My daughter tries to visit, but it's too hard. She looks at us at this quiet war zone, and the guilt overwhelms her. She feels responsible for the explosion, even though I'm the one who built the bomb. I want to tell her it's not her fault that the truth had to come out, but the words get stuck in my throat right there next to the mass. And the mass is still there. Growing. I go to my appointments. He takes me, of course. He sits in the waiting room, scrolling through his phone while I get the bad news. The doctors use words like aggressive and options. I listen and I feel nothing. It feels like justice. The lie I kept in my throat for so long is now eating me alive. There's a poetry to it, I suppose. He still posts about me online. That's how this all started, isn't it? With me telling you what he says. He talks to strangers on the internet about the burden of being a caretaker about his deadweight wife. I know he does it because he has no one else to talk to. I took that from him too. I isolated him with my betrayal. His online ranting is the only release he has. I don't know how this ends. Maybe the cancer will get me. Maybe one day he'll just pack a bag and leave, consequences be damned. Or maybe this is it. Maybe we just go on like this for another 20 years, trapped in this quiet, hateful house until one of us dies. I wanted to find myself. I wanted to feel like a person, not just a role. It was a selfish, desperate search, and I left a trail of wreckage so wide I can't even see the other side. I look at this man, the man I still love, with every broken piece of my being, and I see the full extent of the damage. I didn't just lose myself in my marriage. I incinerated myself, and I took the best person I've ever known down with me. He was the one who gave my life meaning, and I repaid him by turning his life into a tragedy. He calls me his dead weight. He's right. But the truth is, we're both sinking, and I'm the one who chained us together.
Story 2.
Okay, I know what he's going to say about me. He's going to say I'm a cheater, that I did it before and I was planning to do it again. And he'll have his proof screenshots and bits of conversation that he's lined up to make me look like the worst person in the world. The truth is, I don't even know if I can argue with him. I just know that's not how it felt. It didn't feel like a plan to cheat. It felt like trying to breathe after being held underwater for a very, very long time. Let's get the big thing out of the way first. The mistake. The one I've been paying for every single day for the last 8 years. When my husband and I had been dating for just 4 months, I kissed another guy at a party. I was 22, I was drunk, and it was stupid. I told him the next day, crying my eyes out. He said he forgave me. I thought that meant we could move on. What I didn't realize is that his forgiveness came with a life sentence. He never forgot. He never let times forget. It became the ghost in our marriage. Every time I wanted to go out with my friends, there was a hesitation in his voice. Every time a male coworker's name came up, his eyes would get a little bit colder. He never yelled or accused me directly, not after the first year or two. He did something worse. He just got quiet. The silence would fill the entire house, this heavy judging thing that made me feel like I was a criminal on parole. Our life together became a long, drawn-out punishment for something I did when we were practically kids. For a long time, I tried to be the perfect wife to make up for it. I'd text him constantly when I was out. I'd turn down invitations I knew would make him uncomfortable. I stopped having male friends. I slowly cut off pieces of myself to make him feel secure. The problem is, he never did. His insecurity was a black hole, and no matter how much of myself I threw into it, it was never enough. Our intimacy just died. It's hard to feel desired by a man who you know is also constantly watching you, waiting for you to mess up. We went from lovers to a warden and his prisoner living in the same house. At work, I'm a different person. I'm a project manager, and I'm good at it. People listen to me, they respect my opinion. I'm confident, and I get things done. I feel like time's me, asterisk. But every day I'd walk through our front door, and that person would just disappear. I'd shrink down into the untrustworthy wife again, careful with my words, hiding my phone screen without even thinking about it, just out of habit. It was exhausting. Then Stan messaged me on Facebook a few weeks ago. I barely knew him from high school, but he was from my hometown, a place that felt a million miles away from the life I was living. He's a soldier, and his pictures were from all over the world. His life just seemed so big. Purposeful. Our conversations were nothing scandalous. We talked about my job, his deployments, what happened to old friends. He told me I sounded like a rock star at my job, and it was the first compliment I'd gotten in years that wasn't followed by a suspicious glance. He was just a nice guy who saw me as a person, not as my husband's property. Talking to him was like opening a window in a stuffy, sealed room. Last week he mentioned he was going to be in my city for a couple of days to visit his brother. He said his sister Jessica and another girl we knew, Sam, were all going to try and get together for a drink. He asked if I wanted to join. It sounded so normal. So easy. A few hours of laughing and talking about old times, a small escape from the silence at home. I knew I had to tell my husband. If I tried to hide it, it would just prove his worst fears right when he inevitably found out. My whole life was about avoiding that suspicion. So, that night I sat down and told him, trying to sound as casual as possible. Hey, some old friends from my hometown are getting together while one of them is in town. Stan, his sister Jessica, and another girl, Sam. I was thinking of going. I named every single person. Total transparency. I saw the change immediately. The slight tightening of his jaw, the way his eyes went flat. Okay, he said. I'll come with you. My heart just sank. It wasn't a sweet offer. It wasn't him wanting to meet my friends. It was a check-in. It was the warden wanting to accompany the prisoner on their brief trip to the yard. I could see the whole night playing out in my head, my husband sitting silently at a table in a loud bar, nursing one beer for 2 hours, radiating disapproval while I tried to make small talk. He hates staying out late and gets grumpy. He would make everyone uncomfortable until I felt so guilty that I'd suggest we leave early. He would turn my one night of freedom into another test of my loyalty, a test I could never truly pass. Oh, you don't have to do that, I said, trying to keep my voice light. It's just boring hometown gossip. you'd be miserable. Plus, you always go to bed early." He just shrugged. "I don't mind." I was trapped. If I said yes, the night was ruined. If I said no, I was hiding something. So I just deflected. "I probably won't even go. It's just an idea." I lied just to make the conversation stop. A couple of days later, Stan messaged me for my number to put together a group chat to coordinate. I was on the couch, laptop open, and my husband was in the kitchen just a few feet away. I typed back, "Sure, it's my number," and hit enter. I did it right out in the open. Part of me felt like I was daring him to say something, to see how open and honest I was being. But he didn't. He just continued making his stupid protein shake. In his mind, I knew the story was already written. My transparency didn't matter. Every innocent message was just another nail in my coffin. I closed the laptop, a wave of hopelessness washing over me. I went to bed that night feeling sick. I hadn't done anything wrong, not really, but I felt dirty. I felt the weight of his judgment even when he was asleep next to me, a quiet, rumbling anger that I knew was just waiting for a reason to explode. The next morning I woke up and he was already gone. That was weird. He never leaves for the gym without waking me up. I got out of bed, a knot forming in my stomach. I walked into the living room planning to make coffee and shake off the feeling of dread. And then I saw it. My laptop sitting on the coffee table where I'd left it. But it wasn't closed anymore. It was open. The screen was on. My blood ran cold. The messenger window was maximized, the conversation with Stan laid out like evidence at a trial. I didn't even have to look closely to know. He'd seen everything. My stomach twisted into a tight, painful knot. I felt a strange sense of déjà vu, like I was 22 again, about to confess something stupid and life-altering. Except this time I hadn't actually done anything. He walked back into the living room, then holding a mug of coffee, moving with a calm, deliberate slowness that was more terrifying than any shouting match. He didn't look at me at first. He just stood there looking at the laptop screen as if he were reading an interesting article. So he said, his voice completely flat, "Stan?" Just the name hanging in the air between us. "What about him?" I asked, but my voice came out as a weak croak. He finally looked at me, and his eyes were like chips of ice. "Don't play dumb with me, Ashley." I saw the messages, all of them. "You're very pretty. You sound like a rock star. How you think his life is so intriguing. All of this while you were telling me not to come, that I'd be bored." I flinched. He was reading my private thoughts, my little escape, and painting it as a crime. "It's not what you think," I started the classic line that everyone says. "It was a group of friends getting together." "I told you that. I told you about his sister Jessica and Sam." "Oh, write the cover story," he sneered, finally letting a bit of anger show. "The friends you were so eager to see, but not eager enough for your own husband to join you. Funny how that works. You were trying to get rid of me so you could have your little date." The injustice of it all made a flash of heat rise in my chest. I wasn't trying to get rid of you. I was trying to have one single night to myself without you watching my every move. I knew you'd be miserable and grumpy, and you'd make it all about us. I just wanted a break, a few hours to feel like a normal person. A normal person who gives her number to another man while her husband is 10 feet away, he shot back. A normal person who is planning a secret meetup and lying about it. I wasn't lying, I was shouting now, my voice cracking. I told you the names. I told you where I was going. How is that a secret? He took a step closer, his face a mask of cold fury. He lowered his voice and every word was like a punch. Because I know how this works, Ashley. I've seen this before. It starts with messages, then a harmless drink. Then what? You were going to cheat on me? Again? There it was. The word. Asterisk. Again, asterisk. The fight just evaporated out of me. All the air left my lungs. I sank onto the edge of the couch, my whole body feeling heavy and tired. It didn't matter what I said. It didn't matter that this was different, that I was a 30-year-old woman and not a stupid 22-year-old girl. In his eyes, I would always be that girl. All the years of trying to be perfect, of walking on eggshells, of giving up parts of myself to earn back his trust, it all meant nothing. He had never trusted me again, not for a single day. He stood over me, waiting for me to deny it, to cry, to beg. I didn't have it in me. I just stared at the floor. The silence stretched on, and when he spoke again, his voice was different. It was cold and businesslike. All the fake emotion was gone. I've been thinking about this for a while, he said calmly. I've already looked into what happens next. With the house, with alimony. We need to be practical about this. I looked up at him, and for the first time I think I truly saw him. This wasn't a husband heartbroken by a potential betrayal. This was a man who had found his exit strategy. He hadn't been fighting for our marriage these last few miserable years. He'd been building his case. All the quiet treatments, the subtle monitoring, the suffocating suspicion, it wasn't a symptom of his pain. It was a tactic. He was waiting for me to make a mistake, any mistake, so he could pull the trigger and still be the good guy, the victim. He needed me to be the villain so he didn't have to be. The knot in my stomach didn't loosen, but it changed. The sick dread was replaced by a hollow, aching clarity. I had been trying to fix a marriage that he had already condemned. I was a prisoner on death row, trying to redecorate my cell. Okay, I said. My voice was quiet, but it was steady. He seemed surprised. I think he was expecting a bigger scene. He wanted the drama, the tears. He wanted to see me fall apart so he could be sure he was right about me. I refused to give it to him. Okay, he repeated, a little thrown off. Okay, I said again, meeting his gaze. If that's what you want. I didn't feel guilty. I didn't feel like a cheater. I just felt an overwhelming wave of exhaustion, like I'd just finished a marathon I didn't even know I was running. For 8 years I had been carrying the weight of his insecurity, and he had just taken it off my shoulders. He thought he had uncovered my secret plan on my laptop screen. But what he'd really done was sign our divorce papers. He'd exposed the truth of our marriage. It hadn't been real for a very long time. It was a performance, and he had just ended the show. He stood there for another moment, seething with his hollow victory, and then he turned and walked into the bedroom. I heard drawers opening and closing. He was packing a bag. And as he did, the only thing I felt was a quiet, heartbreaking sense of relief. The warden had finally left his post. The silence in the house was no longer heavy and judging. It was just empty. And for the first time in a long, long time, I felt like I could finally breathe. I was free.
Story 3.
I need to get this out. I know what she says about us. My husband and I've seen the whispers, the way people in town look at me in the grocery store. They think we're monsters. They think we threw our own daughter out into the cold. But they don't know. They don't know what it's like to see your child, your beautiful, brilliant child, standing on the edge of a cliff ready to jump and smiling while she does it. We gave her everything. I'm not saying that to sound spoiled, I'm saying it as a fact. We weren't rich, but she had a warm home, good food, new clothes for school every year. We paid for tutors. When she struggled in math, we drove her to every soccer practice. We clapped the loudest at her school plays. We had a plan. It was a good plan. She was smart. She was going to go to college. She wanted to be a teacher. We had brochures from state universities covering the coffee table. Her whole life was this bright, shining path right in front of her. Then one evening when she was 16, she sat us down in the living room and threw a grenade into our lives. "I'm pregnant," she said. Just like that. No tears, no fear, just a calm statement. And the boy, Jared. A nice enough kid, I suppose, but he had no future. He was working part-time at the auto parts store, thinking about community college maybe. They were children. My husband and I just stared at her. It felt like the air had been sucked out of the room. Every dream we had for her, every sacrifice we'd made, just evaporated. We saw her future, and it wasn't college dorms and a teaching degree. It was welfare checks, stained t-shirts, and the exhausted look of a parent who is still a child themselves. We tried to talk to her, to be rational. We talked about options. Not because we're evil, but because we wanted to hand her back her future. We wanted to give her a chance to be a kid for a few more years, to not let one mistake derail everything. She looked at us like we'd suggested murder. She called us cruel. She said she was keeping the baby and she and Jared were going to make it work. It was a fantasy. A childish, dangerous fantasy. We knew what would happen. We'd seen it before with girls in our town. The boy leaves, the girl drops out of school, and she spends the rest of her life struggling. We couldn't let that happen. We had to do something drastic. We had to show her what real life looked like. So we gave her an ultimatum. If she was adult enough to have a baby, she was adult enough to support it. If she wouldn't consider her options, she couldn't stay under our roof and pretend to be a child. We told her to leave. My God, that was the hardest thing I've ever done. I cried for a week straight after she walked out that door. We thought we prayed that a week or two out in the real world would shock her into understanding. We thought she'd come home. She didn't. She went to live with Jared and his parents. For a little while, we thought maybe, just maybe, this could work. At least she wasn't on the street. But then we started to hear things. This is a small town. People talk. A friend of mine who works at the clinic mentioned that Jared's older brother was back in town fresh out of rehab for heroin. He was living in that same house with our pregnant daughter. My husband and I went into a panic. We started asking questions quietly. We found out that Jared's own mother had a history. Years ago, she'd had a car accident and got hooked on painkillers. She was clean now, they said, but we know what that means. The devil is always just waiting at the door. Our daughter had taken her unborn child out of our safe, stable home and brought her into a house of addicts. Our blood ran cold. What were we supposed to do? What would any loving grandparent do? We called Child Protective Services. We told them our concerns. It wasn't to punish our daughter. It was to protect our grandchild. We were terrified. Of course, the caseworker came, looked around, and said everything was fine. They're good at hiding it, people like that. They know how to put on a good face for the authorities. But we knew. The baby was born. A little girl. We saw pictures through a mutual friend. She was beautiful. And our fear grew tenfold. We kept an eye on things. We heard she was working a retail job and was late picking the baby up from daycare a few times. We heard they'd have these big, loud family parties with strangers in and out of the house, and our granddaughter would be up way past her bedtime. Each story was a knife in our hearts. A baby needs routine stability, not a house full of chaos and past addictions. So we called CPS again. And again, every time we heard something that sounded wrong, we called. We were her only line of defense. They investigated and found nothing. They eventually fined us for making unsubstantiated claims. They punished times as asterisk. Us for trying to protect our own grandchild from a dangerous environment. The system completely failed her. Eventually we had to stop. The fine, the threats from the agency, our hands were tied. 5 years went by in a painful, silent blur. Then 6 months ago, my husband got the diagnosis. Pancreatic cancer. Stage 4. The doctors gave him a year, maybe less. The first thing he said to me, his voice cracking, was, "I need to see her. I need to see my granddaughter." After all, the pain, all the anger, a dying man's wish is a powerful thing. I swallowed my pride, my hurt, everything. I found her number and I called. My hand was shaking so badly I could barely hold the phone. I explained about her dad. I asked if we could please see them. There was a long silence on the other end, and then she said, "I'll meet you. Just you and Dad. Alone." Hope is a dangerous, fragile thing. We were so happy, we cried. We thought this was it. She was finally ready to listen, to understand that we only ever acted out of love. We bought a huge teddy bear for our granddaughter and a gift card to the bookstore. We were going to be a family again. We got to the coffee shop early. My husband was looking so frail, but he sat up straight, a nervous smile on his face. We picked a booth by the window. Every time the door opened, our heads would snap up. And then we saw her. She pushed the door open, the little bell chiming. She looked older, of course, but it was her. My heart leaped into my throat. She walked towards our table, her face like a stone mask. And she was completely, utterly alone. My husband reached a shaky hand across the table, trying to take hers, but she pulled back just enough that he missed. The gesture hung in the air between us, a pathetic failed attempt at connection. "Honey," he started, his voice thin, papery. We wanted to explain." She didn't say a word, just stared at us with those flat, empty eyes. It was like looking at a stranger. "We were so scared for you," I jumped in my voice, probably too loud for the quiet coffee shop. "You were just a baby yourself. And that house?" We heard things. About his brother, his mother. We were terrified. You and the baby were in danger. Every call we made to CPS, it wasn't out of spite. It was out of love. We were trying to protect our granddaughter. I waited for a flicker of understanding, a softening around her eyes. Nothing. She just sat there, her hands folded on the table. "Protect her," she finally said, her voice so low and steady it was chilling. "You mean terrorize us? Do you have any idea what that was like, to live in constant fear that a social worker would show up at our door because my own mother reported a messy living room she'd only heard about? Third hand, to have my daughter's daycare providers look at me with suspicion, Jared's. Parents took me in when you threw me out. They loved me. They gave me a home. And you repaid them by trying to have their grandchild taken away." "They were addicts," I said, my voice rising. "We couldn't let our grandchild be raised in that kind of environment." "Jared's brother was in recovery," she said, her voice never changing its calm, even tone. It was infuriating. "He was working the steps, going to meetings. He was the kindest uncle to my daughter. And Jared's mom, her history with pills, meant she was the first person to talk to me about postpartum depression. She was my biggest support. They were a family. A real one. They knew what it meant to struggle and to help each other. You wouldn't know anything about that." Every word was a slap. She was twisting everything, rewriting history to make us the villains and them the saints. "We were trying to do what was right," my husband whispered, looking defeated. "We may have done it wrong, but our hearts were in the right place. We love you." "No," she said, and that one word cut deeper than a knife. "You don't love me. You love the idea of me you had in your head. The daughter who went to college and did everything you planned. You couldn't handle the one who made her own choices." She looked directly at me. "You didn't want to protect my daughter. You wanted to be proven right. You wanted me to fail so I'd come crawling back and admit you knew best." The accusation was so monstrous, so unbelievably unfair that I couldn't even speak. I just shook my head, tears burning in my eyes. Then she did something I will never forget. She reached into her purse and pulled out a small stack of cash held together with a paperclip. She slid it across the table. "What is this?" I asked, confused. "It's for the fine," she said. "The one you had to pay for harassing us through CPS. I wanted to pay you back. I don't want to owe you anything." My husband just slumped in his seat, all the fight gone out of him. The money sat there between us, an insult uglier than any word she could have said. It was blood money. "My daughter," she continued, standing up, "has two wonderful, loving, and supportive grandparents. She doesn't need any more." She looked at my husband, and for a second I thought I saw a crack in her composure. But then it was gone. "I'm sorry you're sick, Dad." "I truly am. But you too. You burned this bridge. You doused it in gasoline and lit the match yourselves." She turned and walked out of the coffee shop. She didn't look back. The little bell on the door chimed and she was gone, leaving us sitting there in silence with a pile of cash, an unopened teddy bear, and the ruins of our family. We drove home without saying a word. My husband went straight to bed, and he didn't really get out of it much after that. It was like she had taken the last bit of his life force with her when she walked out that door. The hope was gone. He got quieter, more distant. He stopped talking about the future. He just faded. He died 4 months later. In his sleep, he never saw his daughter again. I am alone now. The house is so quiet. I spend my days trying to understand. How could a child be so cruel? How could she sit there in front of her dying father and choose her anger over a final moment of peace? Sometimes a friend will show me a picture of her on social media. She's smiling. Her daughter, my granddaughter, is 10 now. She has my husband's eyes. They look happy. And a bitter, angry part of me thinks times of course they look happy, asterisk. She got what she wanted. She cut us out, erased us, and built her perfect little life on top of our broken hearts. She will never understand that everything we did, every horrible, painful decision came from a place of desperate love. We saw a fire and we tried to pull her from it. She thinks we were the ones holding the match. She lays in the bed she made. No, we all do. And mine is a bed of heartbreak made by a child who refuses to understand what real love looks like. And it's the loneliest bed in the world.
Story 4.
You've probably read my husband's story. The story where I'm the monster. The cheating wife who built a family on a mountain of lies. And he's not wrong about the lies. But he's wrong about why. He thinks it was about betrayal, about other men. It was never about them. It was always only about him. We met in high school. He wasn't the captain of the football team or the class president. He was the quiet, sweet boy who sat behind me in history class. He used to talk about his future like it was a movie he'd already seen. He didn't want to be a rock star or an astronaut. He wanted a big, noisy house with a porch swing and a dog. Most of all, he wanted kids. Lots of them. He joked that he needed at least 5 to have his own basketball team. He has bright red hair, and he was so specific about it. "They'll all have my red hair," he'd say, smiling. A whole team of little redheads. It was the purest, most important thing in his life, and because I loved him, it became the most important thing in mine. We got married young, just like we planned. We bought a small house, the starter home that we would fill with the sounds of tiny feet. I couldn't wait. But the months turned into a year, then 2. The silence in our house started to feel heavy, suffocating. We started seeing doctors. It was a humiliating process of tests and questions of being poked and prodded and feeling like a failure. Through it all, we held on to the idea that it would work out. Then we got the news. We were sitting in a small, sterile office, and the doctor was talking in a calm, professional voice. I don't remember the exact words he used, something about zero motility. All I remember is what it meant. The problem was him. He couldn't have children. I watched my husband, my strong, confident man, just collapse. Not on the outside. He just sat there nodding. But his eyes went blank. That dream of his, the one he'd been carrying since he was a boy, the noisy house, the basketball team, the little redheads, it all just died right there in that doctor's office. He heard that he was a failure. That the one thing in the world he was put on this earth to be a father was impossible. He never spoke of it again. Not once. When I tried to bring up adoption or other options, he would just shut down. He'd leave the room or change the subject. Instead, he threw himself into work. He started leaving before I woke up and coming home after I was in bed. He was building the perfect financial life for a family he believed he would never have. He was building a beautiful cage for his own grief, and I was trapped in it with him. I felt him slipping away, and I knew I was losing him to this black hole of sadness. I couldn't let that happen. So I made a decision. It was a cold, hard, terrible choice made out of desperation and a love so fierce it was probably crazy. I decided that if the universe wouldn't give him his family, then I would. Whatever it took. Our eldest daughter, Sarah, wasn't the result of a passionate affair. It was a calculated, horrible mission. I found someone, a man I barely knew, and I did what I had to do. The shame was so heavy I could barely breathe. But when I came home pregnant and told my husband it was a miracle, the light came back on in his eyes. He cried. He held me and he just cried with relief. He never once questioned it. He didn't want to. He just wanted it to be true. He wanted to be a father. And he was a wonderful father. Seeing him hold Sarah for the first time, I knew I'd made the right choice, even if it was the wrong thing to do. My lie gave him back his life. Over the next several years, I did it again. And again. And again. Each time was a separate, agonizing decision. It wasn't a secret life of cheating. There was no romance, no emotion. They were transactions of shame. The father of my next two was a friend who knew our situation and swore he would take the secret to his grave. He understood my desperation. The others, they were just means to an end. Each time I'd come home and bury the ugliness deep inside me, and then I'd get to see the pure joy on my husband's face as our family grew. I built his dream for him piece by painful piece on the ruins of my own soul. He provided for us, loved the kids, and was the perfect father. I was the perfect mother, the keeper of the home. We never fought. Our life was a peaceful, happy performance, and we were both playing our parts. For 33 years it worked. Our house was noisy and full of love. We had 5 beautiful children. 4 of them were adults starting their own lives. We had the life he always dreamed of. And then my daughter Sarah bought an ancestry kit. It was just a fun birthday gift, a silly hobby. She came to me a few weeks later looking at her phone with a confused frown. "Mom, this is weird," she said. "The site is connecting me to all these family members like second cousins, but I don't recognize any of the names on this whole side of the family tree. It says they're from Dad's side, but it's all wrong." My blood turned to ice. A lifetime of secrets, 33 years of carefully guarded walls, and it was all about to be blown apart by a mail-in DNA test. I tried to laugh it off. "Oh, those things are never accurate," I told her, my voice shaking just a little. "It's probably just a glitch in their system." But my husband overheard us. I saw the look on his face. It was the same look from the doctor's office all those years ago. A flicker of that old, deep-seated fear. The insecurity I had spent my entire life trying to protect him from. Sarah's confusion had planted a seed of doubt, and he couldn't let it go. "I'm going to do one," he said quietly a few days later. "Not an ancestry test. A paternity test." "Don't be ridiculous," I said, trying to keep my voice light. "She's your daughter. She has your smile." "I need to know," he said, and he wouldn't look at me. He needed to prove it to himself. He needed to kill the doubt that I had woken up. The 2 weeks we waited for the results were the longest of my life. I felt like I was holding my breath for 14 straight days. Then last Tuesday he came home from work early. He walked into the kitchen and set a single white envelope on the counter between us. He didn't have to say a word. I knew what it was. His hands were trembling as he reached for it, and his face was pale. I looked at the man I had given my entire life to, the man whose happiness was the only thing that ever mattered to me, and I knew our world was about to end. He slid a finger under the flap of the envelope and tore it open. The silence in the kitchen was so total I could hear the crinkle of the paper. His eyes scanned the page and then he just sagged. He didn't shout, he didn't scream. He just leaned against the counter, his whole body seeming to fold in on itself. He put his head in his hands, and a sound came out of him that I will never forget. It was a sob, but it was hollow, like it had been ripped out of his soul. He was crying for his daughter, for the betrayal. But I knew what he was really crying for. He was crying for that boy in the sterile doctor's office 33 years ago. The truth he'd run from his whole life had finally hunted him down and cornered him in his own kitchen. And my heart shattered, because the one thing I had sacrificed everything to prevent, this exact pain, was happening right in front of me, and I was the one who had caused it. That first test was just the beginning. It was like he became a man obsessed. He needed to know about our other children. It didn't matter what I said. The trust was gone. The foundation of our life was gone. One by one, he had our other 3 adult children tested. Each time we waited for the envelope, it was like waiting for a sentence. Negative. 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 The worst part wasn't just that they weren't his. The worst part was that the tests revealed that my 2 sons had the same biological father, but my 2 daughters each had different ones. 3 different men. When he discovered that something in him just broke completely, he stopped looking at me with sadness and started looking at me with disgust. He couldn't see the years between each child. He couldn't see the quiet desperation, the agonizing choices. He just saw a promiscuous monster. He built a story in his head of a wife who lived a secret, sordid life. And in a way, I guess I did. But it was never for me. It was never about them. It was always, always for him. How could I ever make him understand that? The final blow came about a week later. I walked into the living room and they were all there. My husband and my 4 children. All of them. They were sitting on the couches waiting for me. It was an intervention, an ambush. He had the lab reports spread out on the coffee table like evidence at a crime scene. He wanted me to confess. He wanted an explanation. He wanted me to beg and plead for forgiveness for betraying him. But it was my children's faces that destroyed me. They weren't looking at me with anger. It was worse. They were looking at me with a kind of sad confusion, but their eyes were all fixed on their father. They were looking at him with this deep, heartbreaking pity. He was the victim. I was the villain. The family I had built to protect him had now formed a wall around him to protect him from times me*. My son Mark, my oldest boy, was the one who spoke. He wouldn't even look me in the eye. He just stared at the floor and said, "Why, Mom? Why would you do this to him? To us?" How could I answer that? What could I possibly say? I did it because I didn't think your father could handle the truth. I did it because I loved him so much, I destroyed myself to give him what he wanted. It sounded insane. It sounded like an excuse. All the air went out of my lungs. I looked at the lab reports, at their faces, at the ruins of the perfect life I had so carefully constructed, and the only thing that came out of my mouth was a whisper. The tests are wrong. They have to be. It wasn't a real denial. It wasn't a lie, not really. It was a prayer. A stupid, desperate plea to the universe to just turn back time to put everything back in the box and let us be happy again. For a single insane second, I thought if I said it with enough conviction, it might become true. No one believed me. Of course they didn't. The look on my husband's face turned from pain to cold, hard rage. That was the moment he decided he hated me. The weeks after that were silent. A heavy, thick silence that filled every room of our house. They stayed for him, not for me. My children would talk to me if they had to, simple questions about dinner or laundry. But they looked through me. I was a ghost in the home I had built. My husband slept in the guest room. Sometimes I would hear him walking around late at night, and I knew he was just as trapped as I was. In that silence, I finally understood. There was no explanation I could give that would ever fix this. The truth was a weapon, and I had two choices. I could tell him he was the victim of my infidelity and let him hate me for being a monster. Or I could tell him the real truth. I did all of this because I looked at you, the man I loved, and I decided you were too weak to handle the truth of your own body. I pitied you so much that I built your entire life on a lie. The first story would let him be the righteous, wounded husband. He could grieve, he could rage, and eventually he could heal, surrounded by the love of his children. The second story, the real one, would destroy him completely. It would not only confirm his deepest fear about his manhood, but add the unbearable weight of knowing that his whole life, his fatherhood, his happiness, was an act of pity from his wife. It was a wound I knew he could never survive. I had tried to be the architect of his happiness, and instead I became the architect of everyone's pain. I had trapped myself. He wanted an answer, a reason for the betrayal. But the reason was him. It was always him. And I can't make him carry that. I won't. So I'm writing this down, though I don't know who will read it. Maybe no one. But I can't leave this world without the real story being told somewhere. Let him think I was unfaithful. Let him think I was selfish. Let him and my children remember me as the monster who broke their family. It is a much kinder truth than the one we both know would kill him. This is the only thing I have left to control. It is my final silent act of love. I am taking the secret with me.
Story 5.
I'm the ex-girlfriend he wrote about. The cheater. The one who broke the good guy's heart. I've read what he said, and I know how I look. I'm not here to say I'm innocent, because I'm not. I lied, I cheated, I was a coward. But I need you to understand why. Our relationship didn't just suddenly break. It was slowly suffocating me for a very long time. We were together for 4 years, and on paper it was perfect. He was stable, he was kind, and he had a plan for everything, including me. When I was stuck in a dead-end job I hated, he got me a position at his company. Everyone said how lucky I was, and I was grateful, I really was. But it also felt like another golden link in the cage he was building around me. My job, my social life, my future, it was all becoming his world, not ours. He was planning a proposal, a house, a life. He never once stopped to ask if it was the life I actually wanted. I felt less like his partner and more like his project. The job he found me was lonely, My team saw me as the girlfriend, not a colleague. I ate lunch by myself most days, feeling completely invisible until I met M. He was older, part of a different department, and he was the first person in that entire building who just talked to me like a person. He didn't offer to solve my problems or give me career advice. He just listened. He asked about my day and actually cared about the answer. He made me laugh, a real, genuine laugh that I hadn't felt in months. Our friendship was like a window opening in a stuffy room. It was the only thing that was truly mine. I tried to tell my ex about him. I'd mentioned something funny, M said, or how he helped me with a difficult client. My ex listened, nodded, and immediately put M into a neat little box where he couldn't be a threat. "He sounds like a nice father figure for you at work," he said one night. A father figure. It was easier for him to see it that way than to imagine I could have a real exciting connection with another man. And honestly, it was easier for me to just agree. Explaining the spark, the simple joy of being seen as an equal, felt impossible. He wouldn't have gotten it. So I let him believe his version. It was my first big mistake. The lies started small out of a desperate need for space. He wanted me to join him on a business trip to Europe, but the thought of it made my chest tight. Tagging along, sitting in hotel rooms while he had important meetings, being the supportive girlfriend on his arm at dinner. I couldn't do it. So I used the old excuse that always worked: my strict family needed me for something. He never questioned it. He never tried to really get to know my family or see past the convenient shield I'd been using for years. The distance between us was growing, and my life started to split in two. There was the life with him, filled with routine and expectation, and then there was the life with M, where I could just be myself. We started spending more time together outside of work, just as friends. One night, a friend of my ex's saw us at the cinema. My ex called me confused. I panicked. How could I explain I went to see a movie with a male friend in his world? That just didn't happen. So I told him it was a last-minute team outing. The lie tasted like poison, but I swallowed it down. A few weeks later, we were at a new Michelin star restaurant M wanted to try. It was the kind of place my ex would never think to take me. He preferred his usual predictable spots. Of course, we were seen again. This time, I invented a story about meeting an old friend and her husband. Each lie added another brick to the wall I was building between us. I hated myself for it, but the thought of telling the truth, of having the huge, ugly fight and breaking his heart, felt so much worse. My birthday was the breaking point. Every year he'd plan some boring weekend trip to a cottage in the UK. It was sweet, but it was always his idea of what I'd want. This year, M asked me a simple question: what do you actually want to do for your birthday? No one had asked me that in years. We came up with a crazy, wonderful idea: a trip to a beautiful coastal spot called Bournemouth. It was spontaneous and exciting. It was for me. To get the time off, I told my ex my cousin was going through a terrible breakup and I needed to take her away for a few days to cheer her up. The guilt was eating me alive, but the thrill of finally doing something for myself was stronger. That whole last year, the relationship was a ghost. We were just going through the motions. That Christmas, he gave me a beautiful necklace. I felt nothing. I hadn't gotten him anything. A few weeks before, I'd used our shared account to buy an expensive All Saints jacket. He probably assumed it was for him. It wasn't. It was for M. It felt right giving something beautiful to the person who was making me feel like life could be beautiful again. The final summer arrived and I knew I had to end it. I just didn't know how. For my birthday that year, before the big trip, I booked a hotel room for 2 in our own city. I just wanted a night away, a simple celebration with M without the grand escape. A few hours after I booked it, I was scrolling through Snapchat and my blood ran cold. My ex had posted a story. A picture of a pint at a pub with the location tag on. It was 2 streets away from the hotel I had just booked. It wasn't a coincidence. It was a message. He knew. Or he suspected enough to try and trap me. My hands were shaking so hard I could barely use my phone, but I canceled the reservation immediately. A few weeks later, Em and I were at the airport, ready to finally take our trip. We were standing in the economy line, laughing about something stupid. And for the first time in a long time, I felt light. I felt happy. I was finally choosing my own life. Then I looked up across the crowded check-in hall, and I saw him. He was striding towards the business class gate, phone pressed to his ear, looking every bit the successful man he was. He turned his head just for a second, and his eyes locked directly onto mine. The world stopped. There was no confusion in his expression. Just cold, hard certainty. My 2 separate lives had just crashed together in the middle of Heathrow Airport. My phone buzzed in my pocket. A single text message from him. It's over. That was it. No question mark. No anger. Just a cold, simple statement. The way he'd close a business deal. Em looked at me, his smile fading. What is it? I couldn't speak. I just showed him the phone. I felt the blood drain from my face. My fake life and my real life had just collided, and the explosion had left nothing standing. The rest of the trip was a blur. We were in a beautiful place, the place I'd chosen, but I couldn't enjoy it. A dark cloud hung over everything. I was numb. I knew what was waiting for me back home. It wasn't going to be a tearful breakup. It was going to be a trial, and I was already guilty. When I got back, I went to my own flat, not ours. I needed to be on my own ground. He texted me to say he was coming over. A couple of hours later, he knocked. When I opened the door, he looked like a stranger. There was no sadness in his eyes, just a hard, chilling emptiness. He walked past me and sat on my sofa, placing a thin file folder on the coffee table. He didn't want an explanation. He wanted a confession. Let's just get this over with, he said, his voice flat. He opened the folder. Let's start with M. The father figure. He said the words like they were something dirty. Was he a father figure when you were at the cinema on March 12th? My friend sent me a photo. You told me it was a team outing. I called HR. There was no team outing. I just stood there, my arms wrapped around myself. I didn't say anything. What was there to say? He continued, flipping a page. Or how about the restaurant, the one you went to on April 2nd? You told me you were with an old friend and her husband. Strange, because that friend posted pictures from her holiday in Spain that whole week. He had a timeline. A list of my lies, my movements. He had investigated me. Every excuse I had made, he had checked. Every story I had told, he had picked apart. This wasn't a heartbroken boyfriend. This was a prosecutor laying out his case. And then there's my favorite, he said, his voice dripping with sarcasm. Your birthday. First, the hotel. I saw the booking confirmation email on our shared tablet. A room for two. So I went for a drink nearby. I thought I'd give you a chance to come clean. I posted a Snapchat story. And what do you know? An hour later, the booking was canceled. You panicked. I finally found my voice. You set a trap for me. I was trying to understand what was happening to my life, he shot back, his composure finally cracking for a second. I was trying to believe there was some other explanation. He took a deep breath and became calm again. And then the trip. Your cousin, the one with a terrible breakup. I called your aunt to see how she was doing. She had no idea what I was talking about. So, where did you go? Was it Bournemouth? He knew everything. The sheer calculated effort he'd put into uncovering it all was terrifying. He wasn't just hurt. He was methodical. Then he looked at me, and his eyes were full of something that looked like real pain for the first time. The jacket, he said, his voice quiet. The All Saints jacket you bought on my account just before Christmas. I saw him wearing it at the airport. I remember you buying it. I thought it was for me. That was the one that broke me. Hearing it out loud, the casual cruelty of it made me feel sick. I'm sorry, I whispered. It was all I could say. Are you? He asked, genuinely curious. Are you sorry you did it, or are you just sorry you got caught? He stood up, leaving the folder on the table. You made me feel like I was crazy. Like I was insecure and controlling for questioning you. But I was right all along. I just wanted you to admit it to my face. I didn't know how to tell you, I said, tears finally streaming down my face. I was a coward. But you have to understand, I was so unhappy. You had our whole life planned out, but you never asked me if I wanted it. You never saw me. You just saw your project. I saw the woman I loved, he said, his voice cold again. The woman I was going to ask to marry me. M saw a project too. An easy one. He left after that. No yelling, no big scene. Just a quiet, devastating end. The folder was still on the table. A perfect summary of my betrayal. The aftermath was clinical. We divided our things through text messages. He told HR he was moving to a different department so we wouldn't have to see each other. He made it all so clean and efficient. But the emotional fallout was messy. I lost friends who took his side. People at work whispered about me. I carried the guilt like a heavy coat I could never take off. I hurt a good man. I know that, and I have to live with that. But underneath the guilt, there was something else: relief. A huge, scary, thrilling sense of freedom. For the first time in years, my life was my own. My choices were my own. The mistakes were my own. He says he can't trust anyone now. Maybe that's true. But he never really trusted me to be my own person. He trusted the idea of me, the girlfriend he was shaping into a wife. He trusted that his plan was the right plan for both of us. The truth is, I broke his heart, but I did it to save myself from disappearing completely. Em and I are still together. A year after that horrible trip, we went back to Bournemouth. It wasn't a fling born from a broken relationship. It was real. It still is. I'm not asking for forgiveness. I just want people to know that the villain in someone else's story is often just the person who finally decided to start writing their own.
Story 6.
I'm the wife. The one who cheated. You've probably heard my husband's version, and I'm sure I sound like a monster. Maybe I am. But things are never as simple as one person being good and the other being bad. Our story started falling apart long before I ever sent that first text message. It started with the house. It was supposed to be our dream, the place where we'd raise our family and grow old. Instead, buying it nearly broke us. The stress was unbelievable, a constant grinding weight on both of us. We were fighting about money, about paint colors, about everything. The joy was just gone, replaced by this shared anxiety. I thought another baby would fix it. I remembered how happy we were after our daughter was born, how we felt like a team. I thought a second child would bring that feeling back, that purpose. When I brought it up, my husband looked at me like I'd asked him to climb a mountain. He said he had reservations. He talked about money and the stress of the new house. It was the first time I felt like my dream for our family was something I had to sell him on, like a timeshare. But I pushed, and eventually he agreed. The moment I saw that positive pregnancy test, I felt a rush of hope. But when I showed it to him, his smile didn't reach his eyes. It was there for a second, then it vanished, and he confessed he had this nagging dread he couldn't shake. That dread became a wall. He didn't build it brick by brick. He just built it overnight. He decided the only way to deal with his fear was to get a new, better-paying career. And just like that, he was gone. He enrolled in a bunch of online courses and locked himself in his study. He says we still had dinner together, and technically we did. But he wasn't there. He was a ghost at the table, staring through me, his mind on coding or project management or whatever it was he was studying. I tried to talk to him about my day, about our toddler, about the new baby kicking, and he'd just nod, give a one-word answer, and you could tell he was just waiting for me to stop talking so he could go back to his computer. I was dealing with a moody 2-year-old, a high-risk pregnancy that left me exhausted and sick, and a new house that still felt like a construction zone. I was drowning, and my husband was in the other room with noise-canceling headphones on. I have never ever felt so alone in my entire life. I tried to get his attention. I tried to feel like a person again. I'd take long baths, put on a nice dress, do my makeup. I was trying to feel like the woman he fell in love with, not just a tired pregnant mom. He either didn't notice at all or he'd get this suspicious look on his face. "Who are you getting dressed up for?" he'd ask, not like a compliment, but like an accusation. I wasn't just losing my husband. I was disappearing. Then someone at work saw me. He's older, married, and a manager in another department. It started so innocently. He just listened. He'd ask how my weekend was and actually stick around to hear the answer. He noticed when I got a haircut. He told me my new maternity dress looked nice on me. It was like getting a drink of water after walking through a desert for months. I didn't realize how thirsty I was for a little bit of attention, for someone to just see me as a human being. It started with friendly chats, then we started texting. Stupid things at first, jokes and complaints about work. But his texts made my heart beat faster. They were a bright spot in my gray, lonely days. It felt good to have a secret, something that was just for me. For the first time in so long, I felt interesting and alive. I know what you're thinking. And yes, it went further. A lot further. Was it wrong? Of course it was. It was a terrible, reckless thing to do. It was an escape. It was a fantasy where I was the main character, where I was wanted and exciting. My husband was upstairs studying for a future I felt no part of, and I was downstairs on my phone building a temporary world where I wasn't just a household appliance. The other man would give me little assignments, things like, wear the green dress tomorrow, or tell me about your first kiss. It sounds weird, I know, but it was a game. And it was intoxicating because it was all about me. For a few hours I wasn't a neglected wife or a vessel for a baby my husband seemed to resent. The first time we met at a hotel, I was so nervous I almost threw up. But in that room, I wasn't a mom. I wasn't pregnant. I was just a woman being desired. It was a fantasy, but it was the only thing that was keeping me from completely breaking down. The fantasy came crashing down when my husband found the messages on my social media. The look on his face, I will never forget it. He was broken and I had broken him. He kept asking why. Why, but how could I explain it? How could I say, because you checked out? Because you made me feel invisible. Because your dread for our new baby made me feel like I was a burden. It would have just sounded like excuses. It would have sounded like I was blaming him. So I gave him the simple answers. I told him it was the pregnancy hormones, that I was stupid, that it was a mistake and it meant nothing. It was easier than trying to explain the slow, quiet death of our marriage. I promised to end it. And I meant it. I really, truly wanted to fix my family. I cut off all contact with my coworker. I focused on my husband. For a few weeks we tried. He came out of his study. We went on dates. We took our daughter to the park. It was like we were acting out a play of what a happy family looked like. But it felt so fragile, like one wrong word would shatter everything. But the affair wasn't just physical. It was an emotional habit, a crutch I had relied on for months. I felt like I couldn't just ghost him and move on. I needed to see him one last time, to say a real goodbye, to close that chapter completely, so I could truly focus on my marriage. I needed closure. I know how that sounds, but it felt true to me. It felt necessary. I knew my husband wouldn't understand. His trust in me was a thread, and asking to go see the man I cheated on him with would snap it instantly. So I lied. I told him I had a one-night business trip for work, a last-minute training seminar an hour away. It was a stupid, panicked decision. As I packed an overnight bag, my hands were shaking. I felt sick with guilt, but I told myself it was for the greater good. One last lie to end all the lies. After this, I could finally be the wife and mother my family deserved. I just had to get through this one night. I drove to the hotel, met him, and ended it for good. The whole drive home, I rehearsed what I would say to my husband, how our new life would start tomorrow. I felt a strange sense of relief. It was over. I had done it. I pulled into our driveway, took a deep breath, and walked inside. The house was quiet. He was sitting on the couch in the living room, with all the lights off except for the glow of his phone screen. He didn't look up when I came in. The air was cold and heavy, and in that moment I just knew something was terribly wrong. "How was the trip?" he asked, without looking up from his phone. His voice was completely flat. It was the kind of quiet that's louder than screaming. All the relief I had felt on the drive home evaporated. "It was fine," I said, my voice sounding shaky even to my own ears. long, tiring. I started taking things out of my overnight bag, trying to act normal, trying to pretend the air in the room wasn't thick enough to choke on. "Good seminar?" he asked. The question just hung there. He still hadn't looked at me. "Yeah, you know, corporate stuff." I was rambling. My heart was pounding in my chest. He knew. I didn't know how, but he knew. He finally looked up from his phone, and his eyes were hollow. There was no anger in them yet, just a chilling emptiness. "That's funny," he said, his voice dangerously low. "Because your work doesn't have a seminar scheduled for tonight." I called them. My blood ran cold. Of course he had. He had been stewing here all night, checking, verifying, building his case against me. My lie was so thin, so stupid. "And that's also funny," he continued, standing up and walking towards me, "because location sharing is still on." He turned his phone around so I could see the screen. It was a map. A map with a neat, tidy blue line showing my car's journey from our house to a hotel downtown and then back home. Not to the conference center, an hour away where I had claimed to be. The floor felt like it dropped out from under me. I had nothing. No more lies, no more excuses. I was ending it, I whispered the words, feeling pathetic and small. I swear. I went there to tell him it was over for good. I needed to do it in person. I needed closure so I could come home to you and be done with it all. He laughed. It was a horrible, bitter sound that had no humor in it. "Closure. You lied to my face. Packed an overnight bag and went to a hotel with the man you cheated on me with, and you call it closure." He was shouting. Now the emptiness in his eyes replaced by a firestorm of rage and pain. "You think I'm that stupid? You think I'm that much of a fool?" "It's the truth," I cried, tears streaming down my face. "I know how it looks, but I am telling you the truth. It's over. I ended it tonight." He stared at me, his chest heaving. He looked like he was searching for a single reason to believe me, but couldn't find one. Then a new, cruel kind of calm settled over him. "Okay," he said. "Okay. If it's really over, you won't mind proving it." He pointed to my phone, which I had set on the kitchen counter. "Pick it up. Text him right now. Tell him your husband knows everything and that you can never speak to him again. Let's see what he says." I froze. It felt like a trap. A test I was designed to fail. This wasn't about truth. It was about power. He wanted to watch me, to control the narrative, to humiliate me. He wanted to see me perform my repentance for him. My affair was born out of feeling invisible and powerless. And here he was in the most critical moment trying to make me his puppet. "No," I said, my voice barely audible. What? He snarled. "Why not? If it's over, what's the problem?" "Because this isn't about us fixing things," I said, a new kind of strength, a desperate, cornered animal strength rising in me. "This is about you punishing me. This is a game and I won't play." "So you're protecting him," he spat, the accusation dripping with venom. "After everything, you're still protecting him." He lunged for my phone, but I was faster. I snatched it off the counter and held it to my chest. It was a reflex. It wasn't about the other man. It wasn't even about the messages. It was about saying, "You don't get to control this. You don't get to control me." It was the last piece of myself I had left, this one final act of defiance, and I clung to it. His face crumbled. Seeing me clutch the phone like a lifeline was his answer. To him it was a confession. It was proof that I was still in it, that I had chosen the affair over him, over our family. The hope I had seen flickering in his eyes just moments before died completely. He looked at me as if I was a complete stranger, a monster who had taken his wife's place. The silence that followed was worse than the shouting. It was the sound of our marriage taking its last breath. He just shook his head slowly, a single tear rolling down his cheek. He didn't say another word to me. He walked past me, went upstairs, and I heard the drawers of our dresser opening and closing. A few minutes later, he came down with a duffel bag. He walked to the front door without a glance in my direction, opened it, and left. The click of the lock echoed in the silent house. I stood there in the kitchen for I don't know how long, phone still clutched in my hand until my legs gave out, and I slid down to the floor. It was over. My stupid, desperate attempt to get the closure I thought I needed had destroyed the one thing I was trying to save. I had lied to end the lie. And in doing so, I had burned the whole world down. He thinks he caught me cheating a second time. That's the story he'll tell everyone, and that's what they'll all believe. They'll see my refusal to give him my phone as the ultimate proof of my guilt. But the truth is, he had already decided I was guilty. The phone wasn't a tool for finding the truth. It was a weapon to confirm his worst fears. He didn't want reconciliation. He wanted a confession. He wanted to win. He never once asked me why I was so lonely I would look for comfort in another man's arms. He never asked what it felt like to manage a toddler, a house, and a high-risk pregnancy while he hid in his study building a future I wasn't sure I was part of. He only ever asked, "Why would you do this to me? It was never about us. It was about him." Snatching that phone was the last selfish thing I did. But it was also the first thing I did for myself in a long time. I refused to let my messy, complicated, painful story be reduced to a text message in his cruel little test. He thinks he caught a cheater. All he really did was prove he never saw me at all. And now he never will again.
Story 7.
I see what he's been writing about me online. Evil ex-wife, he calls me. It's a nice, simple title. It fits the story he tells, the one where he's the good guy who was wronged and I'm the monster who destroyed everything. It's a much easier story to tell than the truth. The truth is messy. The truth doesn't have a clear hero. He likes to start the story with my workplace injury. That's where he became the saint. He talks about how he took care of me, how he was my rock. He leaves out the part where his care felt like a cage. Before the accident, I was a person. I had a job, I was good at friends, a life. After, I was just a body full of pain. It wasn't a sharp pain you could grit your teeth through. It was a dull, constant grinding that wore you down day after day. It was the first thing I felt when I woke up and the last thing I felt before a fitful sleep. Then we lost the baby. After that, the pain wasn't just in my back. It was everywhere. It was a hollow space in my chest that ached worse than any broken bone. I wasn't just a patient anymore. I was a tragedy. And my husband, my rock, became my warden. His support was him counting my pain pills. It was him calling me every hour when he was at work to make sure I hadn't fallen. It was him talking to my doctors like I wasn't even in the room, explaining times, my times, symptoms, managing times, my times care. He wasn't my husband, he was my handler. I stopped being a wife and became his full-time project, the broken thing in the spare room he had to manage. I started to feel like a ghost. I'd look in the mirror and not recognize the tired, empty eyes looking back. The relapse. God, I'm so ashamed of it, but it wasn't a party. It wasn't me trying to get high. It was a desperate attempt to turn down the volume. The extra pills didn't make me happy. They just made me numb. For a few hours, the constant grinding in my bones would quiet down, and the hollow ache in my chest would feel a little less vast. It was a surrender. I was drowning, and the pills were the only thing that made it feel like I could hold my breath a little longer. Then came the affair. I know there's no excuse for it. I know it's the part of the story that makes everyone agree I'm the monster. But you have to understand, I hadn't felt like a woman in years. I felt like a medical chart. This guy, he was just a man from a coffee shop. He didn't know about the injury, the miscarriage, the pills. When he looked at me, he didn't see a patient or a project. He just saw a woman. He laughed at my jokes. He told me I was beautiful. For 1 hour twice a week, I wasn't the broken wife. I was just me. It was a stupid, selfish, and desperate grab for a single breath of fresh air after years of being underwater. I started writing everything down in a journal. I couldn't talk to my husband. How could I tell the man who was managing my entire existence that his care was suffocating me? How could I tell my perfect, sainted caretaker that I was cheating and taking too many pills just to feel human? So I wrote it all down. The pain, the shame, the guilt, the brief moments of feeling alive. It was the only place I could be honest. The only place I could be ugly. The guilt was eating me alive. I couldn't live with the lies anymore. I thought if I was just honest, brutally honest, maybe we could break through this horrible, quiet life we were living. Maybe we could actually talk for the first time in years. So I told him. I sat him down on the couch, the same couch where I spent most of my days, and I confessed to the affair. I didn't give him details, I just told him what I'd done. His reaction wasn't what I expected. There was no yelling, no throwing things. He just went quiet and still. He said he was hurt, that he couldn't believe it, but that he loved me and we would get through it. He suggested therapy. I cried with relief. I thought times, this is it. This is our chance. Asterisk. For 1 week, I actually had hope. I flushed the extra pills. I ended the affair. I started looking up marriage counselors. I thought we were finally going to fight for our marriage. A few days later, he told me he needed to go to the city for the night. He said he needed some space to clear his head to process everything. He was so calm, so reasonable, he hugged me at the door and told me we'd talk when he got back. I believed him. I spent that night cleaning the house, making plans for a nice dinner for his return. I felt like I could finally breathe again. He came home the next evening. I heard his keys in the door and I went to greet him, a nervous smile on my face. But he walked right past me. He didn't look at me. His face was a cold, hard mask. He went straight to our bedroom. I followed my heart starting to pound. "Is everything okay?" I asked. He didn't answer. He just started pulling drawers out of my nightstand, my dresser, tossing things onto the floor. "What are you doing?" I pleaded. He kept searching, methodical and silent. Then he went to my side of the bed and felt under the mattress. His hand came back out, holding my journal. My blood ran cold. It was my last private space, the one place I thought was safe. He flipped it open, his eyes scanning the pages filled with my ugly, desperate handwriting. I felt naked, violated. He looked up from the journal, his eyes completely empty of the man I married. There was no pain, no sadness, just ice. Then his eyes drifted to the nightstand, to the small unmarked bottle I kept hidden in the very back of the drawer, my emergency stash. He reached in, pulled it out, and shook it. The rattle of the pills was the loudest sound I had ever heard. He looked from the journal in one hand to the pills in the other, and then he looked at me. And in that moment I saw a switch flip behind his eyes. It wasn't the look of a heartbroken husband. It was the look of a man who had just been handed a gun. He didn't use the gun to shoot me. That would have been too quick, too merciful. He used it to hold me hostage. "We need to talk," he said, his voice flat and empty. He dropped the journal on the coffee table and set the pill bottle next to it like evidence at a trial. I went to the city to see a lawyer. A very good one. My stomach dropped. The hope I'd foolishly held for the past week evaporated, replaced by a cold, crawling dread. The trip to the city, the calm demeanor, the hug at the door, it was all a lie. He wasn't processing his pain. He was sharpening his knife. He pulled a thick stack of papers from his briefcase and laid them out next to the journal. "This is a divorce decree. You're going to sign it." I couldn't speak. I just stared at the top page, at the bolded legal words that looked like a foreign language. He started walking around the living room, not looking at me, just talking to the walls. He was laying out his case. He told me he'd gone through my phone while I slept the night before he left. He'd found the pictures. The ones I'd taken in my darkest moments of the crushed pills on a coaster, a stupid private record of my failure. He had everything. The journal entries detailing the affair, the pill bottle proving the relapse, the photos confirming it all. "You can sign this," he said, tapping the papers, "and we can do this quietly. You walk away. You take your car, your clothes, and your own debt. My 401k, the truck, the house, they stay with me. It's clean." Or I finally whispered, my voice trembling. He finally looked at me and his eyes were completely dead. "Or I will take these," he gestured to the journal and the pill bottle, "and I will take your phone and I will go to court. I will show the judge what you are. A cheating, drug-addicted, unstable woman. I will call your lover to the stand. I will call your family. I will ruin you. You will walk away with nothing but the clothes on your back and a reputation that will follow you for the rest of your life. What little you have left, I will burn it to the ground. Your choice." It wasn't a choice. It was an execution. He had me. He knew I was too broken, too ashamed, too tired to fight. Who would believe me? He was the saint, the long-suffering husband. I was the monster. He'd built that story for years, and now he had the proof to sell it to the world. I picked up the pen. My hand was shaking so hard I could barely form my own name. With each signature, I felt a piece of myself being carved away. Signing away the truck I helped him buy. Signing away the retirement fund I contributed to by working for years before my injury. signing away 8 years of my life as if they never happened. When it was done, he took the papers, put them neatly back in his briefcase, and snapped it shut. "I want you out by morning," he said, and walked out of the room. Something inside me broke. The years of silence, of pain, of being managed and controlled, all of it just exploded. I wasn't thinking. I grabbed the nearest thing, a ceramic lamp he loved, and I threw it against the wall. The smash was the most satisfying sound I had ever heard. It was the scream I couldn't let out. I tore pictures off the wall, the smiling, happy couple that was a lie. I overturned the coffee table. I wasn't trying to destroy his things. I was trying to make the outside of our house look like the inside of my soul. It was a tantrum thrown by a woman who had just lost everything. By the time I was done panting and sobbing in the wreckage, I felt nothing. I was just empty. I packed a bag, got in my car, and drove away from the life I had just signed away. The first few months were a blur. I got a tiny apartment and a job as a receptionist. It was the first real job I'd had in 5 years. It wasn't much, but it was mine. For the first time, I felt a tiny flicker of something that wasn't pain or shame. It felt like hope. The hope lasted for 3 weeks. Then I was called into my boss's office. She looked uncomfortable. She said she'd received an anonymous call, a concerned citizen who wanted to warn her about her new employee. The caller told her about my history with prescription drug abuse and my emotional instability. I was fired that afternoon. He didn't even have the guts to do it himself. He just planted the bomb and let someone else pull the trigger. Next came the doctors. My family physician, who I had seen for 10 years, suddenly wouldn't refill my regular pain medication. His nurse told me a note had been placed on my file. When I tried a new clinic, they treated me like a criminal the second they pulled up my records. He had called them all. He'd painted the picture of me as a desperate junkie, and now the system designed to help people was blacklisting me. He knew the pain was my biggest weakness, and he made sure I would never escape it. The final cruelest blow came about 6 months after I left. It was delivered by the last person I ever expected, my best friend Sarah. She called me sounding sweet and concerned, asking to meet for coffee. I thought she wanted to check on me. I was so naive. She spent 20 minutes telling me how worried she was. Then she casually mentioned she'd been spending a lot of time with my ex-husband. Helping him, she said. He was just so broken up about everything. And then she dropped it. "We're together now," she said, a little smirk playing on her lips. "He's just so good to me. He says he finally knows what it's like to be with a woman who isn't a constant burden. He hadn't fallen in love with her. He'd recruited her. He gave her a front row seat to my misery and a script to read from. He didn't just want to win, he wanted an audience. He wanted to make sure I knew that every part of my old life had been successfully transferred over to someone better, someone healthier, someone who wasn't me. So that's the real story. The story he doesn't post online. I'm not the evil ex-wife. I'm the woman he broke and then meticulously keeps broken. He enjoys my suffering because he created it. Every time he hears I'm struggling working at a dive bar to make rent, still fighting the same demons, he made sure I could never escape. It just proves his story right. He gets to be the hero who survived the monster. He wasn't a victim who got revenge. He was a hunter who waited for his prey to get caught in a trap before he walked over and slowly, carefully broke its other 3 legs.
Story 8.
My husband's job is to find the truth, but the truth he looks for is always ugly. He's a private investigator. For years I watched him bring home stories of cheating spouses, embezzling partners, and hidden lives. He was good at it. He could spot a lie from a mile away. The problem was, he never turned it off. Our marriage didn't feel like a partnership. It felt like a long-term investigation where I was the primary subject. For the first few years it was fine, but slowly he stopped seeing me and started seeing patterns. A credit card charge for a lunch he didn't know about wasn't just lunch. It was an anomaly. A late night at work wasn't just a deadline, it was a deviation from the schedule. Our conversations became little more than him collecting data. How was your day wasn't a question, it was a request for an alibi. Our bed, which used to be our sanctuary, felt like 2 separate islands. He was there physically, but his mind was always somewhere else, sifting through evidence, leaving me completely and utterly alone in the quiet of our perfect-looking home. A deep, heavy sadness settled over me, a depression so quiet I could barely name it myself. He never even noticed. Then I got the new job. It was in sales, a high-pressure environment, but for the first time in forever I felt alive. I was good at something again. I had a purpose that wasn't just the PI's wife. And that's where I met David. I honestly couldn't stand him at first. He was loud, a little arrogant, and way too confident. But he was also the first person in years who looked at me like I was a person, not a puzzle. He saw that I was smart and ambitious. When I had an idea, he didn't poke holes in it. He helped me build it up. He listened when I talked about the suffocating silence at home, and he didn't offer a 5-point plan to fix it. He just said, "That sounds incredibly lonely. I'm sorry." It was like a dam broke inside me. I had a friend. A real one. That's when the small lies started. They weren't meant to be malicious. When I told my husband I was going to a coffee shop to catch up on emails, I was actually meeting David for lunch. I just needed a space for myself, a conversation that wasn't going to be filed away and analyzed later. Those lunches were my lifeline. We talked about work, about our pasts, about everything and nothing. I could laugh a real deep belly laugh and not feel self-conscious. I felt like myself. The big work trip to Florida was a major turning point for us at work and for me personally. We were getting ready to pitch a huge client. The week before, feeling a surge of confidence I hadn't felt since my 20s, I bought a new bathing suit. It was a bright blue 2-piece, something a little more revealing than I would normally wear. I bought it for me. I wanted to sit by the hotel pool after our meetings and feel the sun on my skin and feel good. Not for David, not for anyone. For me. My husband found it in my suitcase while I was packing. He held it up not with a smile or a compliment, but with a flat, unreadable expression. "When did you get this?" he asked. The question wasn't curious, it was accusatory. I saw the gears turning in his head. Asterisk new variable. Unexplained purchase, motive unknown. Asterisk. I panicked and said the first stupid thing that came to mind, something about a friend giving it to me. I knew it was a weak lie, and the look he gave me confirmed it. He didn't press it, but he logged it away. Another piece of evidence. The work we were doing with David got more intense. We needed a place to spread out papers and work late without the office gossips watching our every move. So we started booking hotel rooms. It sounds exactly like what it was, I know, but at first it truly was just for work. We called it our war room. We'd order food work for hours and brainstorm. But in the privacy of those quiet, generic rooms, the lines began to blur. The work talk would drift into personal talk. The air would get thick with everything we weren't saying. One night after we'd landed a huge part of the project, we were celebrating with cheap champagne in paper cups. He looked at me, and he really saw me. He saw the tired, lonely woman behind the successful salesperson. And then he leaned in and kissed me. It was wrong. I knew it was wrong, but it was also the first time in years I had felt anything close to passion. It was the first time someone had touched me without it feeling like a routine. After that, there were no more lines. The emotional affair became physical. It wasn't love. It was a desperate grab for connection. A terrible mistake fueled by years of emotional starvation. Over the next 6 months, we met in hotels about 10 times. Each time I felt a horrible mix of guilt and relief. The day before my wedding anniversary, I was the one who booked the room. The date on the calendar felt like a mockery, a reminder of the emotional desert I was living in. What I had with David wasn't right, but it was a fire, and I was so cold. That last Saturday morning feels like a dream now. My husband was home sitting at the kitchen table, nursing a cup of coffee and looking through case files. I told him I had a last-minute training session for work across town. He just nodded, his eyes not even leaving the papers in front of him. He didn't ask where or what it was for or when I'd be back. He just accepted my data point and moved on. The entire drive over my stomach was in knots. I knew I had to end it. I couldn't live in two separate worlds anymore. I pulled into the parking lot of the Comfort Inn, found a space, and killed the engine. I sat there for a minute, my heart pounding in my chest. I took a deep breath, grabbed my purse, and walked into the sterile, quiet lobby. I sent a quick text to David. "I'm here." I had no idea my husband had put a GPS tracker on my car a week ago. I had no idea he was sitting in his own car across the street, waiting for the final piece of evidence to fall into place. My phone buzzed in my hand a few seconds later, but it wasn't a reply from David. The name on the screen made my blood run cold. My husband. I stared at it frozen. Why was he calling me right now? I declined the call, my hand shaking, and my phone immediately buzzed again. This time a text. Asterisk. I know you're in the lobby. I'm outside. Come out here so we can get this over with. Asterisk. Get this over with. It wasn't the message of a heartbroken husband. It was the summons of an investigator who had closed his case. The air left my lungs. The world tilted. I felt 100 pairs of eyes on me, even though the lobby was nearly empty. I looked up and saw him through the glass doors, standing by his car, his arms crossed. He wasn't angry. He wasn't crying. He was just waiting. Patiently. Like he was waiting for a suspect to turn themselves in. Every survival instinct screamed at me to run, to go up to the room and hide, but I knew it was pointless. He had me. I walked toward the doors like a woman walking to her own execution. The moment I stepped outside, the cool morning air felt like a slap. It's not what you think, I said, the words tasting like ash in my mouth. It was a stupid, panicked thing to say, and the look he gave me confirmed it. He didn't even flinch. Get in the car. The drive home was the longest 10 minutes of my life. The silence was so heavy I could feel it pressing on my chest. He didn't look at me. He just drove his knuckles white on the steering wheel. I kept replaying his text in my head. Asterisk. Get this over with. Asterisk. He had known. He had been collecting his evidence, building his case against me, and that morning was just the final piece of the puzzle. I wasn't his wife in that car. I was his perpetrator. The next 6 weeks were not a conversation. They were an interrogation. He didn't scream or yell. It was worse. He was calm, methodical. He sat me down at the kitchen table and laid it all out like a case file. The GPS data for my car. The bank statements with lunches I had lied about. A timeline of every late night, every business trip. He had facts. He just needed the confession. Who is he? He asked. How long? What did you do? Every question felt like a trap. I was so terrified. I saw the man I married disappear, completely replaced by a cold, calculating stranger who only wanted to confirm his own worst suspicions. So I did what any cornered animal would do. I lied to protect myself. I told him about David, but I downplayed everything. I told him we'd only ever kissed that one time in the hotel room. I told him the other times were just for work. I was trying to give him an answer that would stop the questions, that would maybe, just maybe, leave a tiny crack open for us to find our way back. But he didn't want a way back. He wanted the whole ugly truth. My partial confession wasn't enough. It didn't fit all the data points. For 6 weeks he chipped away at me. He'd bring it up at random times. While we were watching TV, while I was making dinner. Your story doesn't make sense, he'd say. 10 hotel rooms for one kiss. It's not logical. He accused me of trapping him in a marriage built on lies, but he was the one setting the snares with every question. During that time, I kept talking to David. I know how that sounds. But my husband had become my prosecutor, and I felt so completely alone. David was the only person on earth who knew what was happening. He was my only support system. I'd call him from the grocery store parking lot, crying, my world falling apart. We weren't planning more secret meetings. We were talking about how I could survive the interrogation. He'd tell me to stay strong, and I'd ask him how to hide our calls so my husband wouldn't have more evidence. It was a messed up, desperate attempt to hold on to the only person who had shown me any kindness while my life imploded. My husband called it tapering down, as if I was some addict he was trying to wean off a drug. He saw it as me trying to trick him to keep my connection to David alive behind his back. He didn't see it for what it was, a terrified woman trying to let go of her only lifeline before she drowned. The end came on a Tuesday night. I was exhausted. I hadn't slept properly in weeks. The weight of his suspicion was crushing me. We were in the living room. The silence stretched between us as always when he looked at me and said, "I just need the truth, all of it. Then we can decide what to do." I looked into his eyes, searching for a hint of the man I loved, for a trace of a husband who wanted to heal. I found nothing. There was only the PI waiting for the last piece of information to close his file. He didn't want to fix us. He wanted to be right. So I gave up. It was physical, I said, my voice barely a whisper. It was a sexual relationship. For about 6 months. I watched his face. There was no flash of new pain, no shock, just a slow, quiet nod. It was the look of confirmation, the look of a man whose theory had just been proven correct. He had his confession. Case closed. In that moment, I knew our marriage wasn't just broken. It had never been what I thought it was. He didn't want a partner. He wanted a subject he could trust. And I had failed his investigation. What I did with David was a terrible, destructive mistake. I blew up my own life out of loneliness and desperation. But the bomb was already there, ticking quietly in the space between us for years. He was just the one who finally documented the explosion. I had lost my marriage, my friend, and whatever was left of myself. And the worst part was, I was still just as lonely as when it all began.
Story 9.
I know what my husband told you. I know how I look. I'm the cheater, the liar, the one who broke our family. And I am. I did those things. But a story is never just one thing, and a person is never just the worst thing they've ever done. Before I was the villain in his story, I was just disappearing. Our life was perfect on paper. My husband is a good man. He's a planner, a provider. He made sure the mortgage was paid, the cars were serviced, and the retirement accounts were healthy. He managed our life like it was the most important project he'd ever been assigned, and he never missed a deadline. We had 2 amazing kids, a nice house, and a good neighborhood. It was the exact life I thought I always wanted. But somewhere along the way, I stopped being a person in it. I became a line item on his project plan. I was mom. I was wife. I was the chauffeur, the cook, the one who knew where the extra light bulbs were and when the kids needed their checkups. My husband would come home and ask how was the day, but he wouldn't wait for the answer. He'd be looking at the mail or scrolling through his work emails on his phone. He loved me, I believe that. But he didn't times me anymore. I was just a part of the house, like the furnace or the plumbing. As long as I was functioning correctly, I didn't require any special attention. The loneliness was an ache so deep I started to forget what it felt like not to have it. Then I met him. The AP. It wasn't dramatic. We were parents on the same committee at school. It started with just talking. He'd ask me about a book I was reading, and he would actually listen to what I thought about it. He remembered a stupid story I told about my childhood dog. He saw me. Not the mom, not the wife, just me. It felt like taking a deep breath after being underwater for years. The affair was a terrible, stupid mistake. I knew it was wrong every single second. But it was also the only thing that felt like it belonged to me. It was a secret, messy, selfish corner of the world where I wasn't just a role I was playing for everyone else. It was a desperate attempt to feel like a real person again. When my husband found out, the world ended. The look on his face, it shattered me. The beautiful, stable life he had so carefully built was in flames, and I was the one holding the matches. The guilt was a physical thing. It was heavy, suffocating. I saw the pain I had caused him, the father of my children, the man I had built a life with. I hated myself for it. I would have done anything to take it back. We agreed to try. We started therapy. He laid out the rules for reconciliation like a new project plan. The main rule, the non-negotiable one, was no contact with the AP. 0. Block his number, delete him from everything, act like he doesn't exist. I promised. I swore I would. I meant it with every fiber of my being. But it was impossible. He wanted me to just stop, to cut out this part of my life and pretend it never happened. But the AP was the only person on the planet who knew the whole ugly truth. He was the only one who saw me when I was invisible. How was I supposed to talk about that with my husband, the man whose heart I had just ripped out? I couldn't tell him. I was terrified that I felt lost, that some days I didn't even know who I was anymore. He would just see it as an excuse. He was the victim. I had no right to have complicated feelings. My friends only knew the perfect wife version of me. I couldn't tell them. I was completely alone in the wreckage I had created. So I broke my promise. I kept talking to him. Not like before. It wasn't romantic. It was desperate. It was like calling the one other person who was at the scene of the car crash to ask if they remembered how it happened. I would text him when the guilt was eating me alive, when my husband looked at me with that empty hurt expression. He was the only one I could say it to. I was drowning, and he was the only one who knew what the water felt like. I deleted the texts and the call logs every single time. It sounds bad, I know. It looks like I was just hiding the affair all over again. But I wasn't hiding it from my husband. I was hiding my weakness. I was so desperate for him to see that I was trying, that I was getting stronger, that the good wife was coming back. I couldn't let him see the pathetic, scared woman who still needed a crutch to get through the day. Every deleted message was me trying to erase my own failure, hoping that if he didn't see it, it wasn't real. The weeks went on. Therapy was hard. Some sessions were just us sitting in silence. Other times it was him listing my failures. But there were moments, tiny little cracks of light, where I thought we might actually make it. We'd share a small smile over one of the kids' jokes. He'd touch my hand for a second longer than necessary. I held onto those moments like a lifeline. I thought we were building something new. I thought the honesty was starting to work, even if mine was incomplete. He was getting calmer, more distant, but I told myself it was part of the process. He was processing. He was healing. The rages had stopped, replaced by a quiet, calculating stillness I mistook for acceptance. I thought he was finally starting to see me again, the real me who was trying to find her way back. This week he told me he thought we were ready for a real breakthrough in our next therapy session. He seemed almost hopeful. For the first time in months, I felt a flicker of actual hope myself. Maybe we had finally hit the bottom and were on our way back up. We drove to the therapist's office together. I remember looking over at him in the car, about to say something about how glad I was that we were still trying. But the look on his face stopped me cold. It wasn't anger. It wasn't sadness. It was the calm, satisfied look of a man who had already won the game and was just waiting for his opponent to realize it. I walked into the therapist's office feeling lighter than I had in months. I sat on the familiar gray couch and smiled at him a real smile. He didn't smile back. He just sat there, his hands resting on a manila folder in his lap. He looked at our therapist doctor, Alan, and nodded like he was giving her a signal to begin. So she started. You mentioned you wanted to talk about a breakthrough. My husband opened the folder. I did, he said, his voice flat and empty. I've had a breakthrough in my understanding of the situation. He pulled out a stack of papers and slid them across the coffee table toward me. Divorce papers. My name was already typed on every line. My breath caught in my throat. I just stared at them. This wasn't a breakthrough. This was an ambush. "I don't understand," I stammered, looking from the papers to his face. There was nothing there, no anger, no sadness, just a cold, hard finality. "I think you do," he said. He then pulled his phone out of his pocket. "I did what you couldn't. I sought out the truth." He pressed play. A recording started, and I heard his voice, then another man's. The AP's. My husband had confronted him, recorded the whole thing. He'd edited it down to just the worst parts, the confirmations of calls and texts that I had promised were over. It was a confession. My confession coming out of another man's mouth. He played it for me, for our therapist, like a prosecutor presenting evidence to a jury. Every word was a nail in the coffin of our marriage. I felt the blood drain from my face. This wasn't a therapy session. It was a public execution, and I was the one on the chopping block. He hadn't come here to heal with me. He had come here to win. He wanted a witness to my final humiliation. He wanted to watch me break in front of the one person who was supposed to be helping us fix it. When the recording ended, the silence in the room was deafening. He put the phone away. "I've called my lawyer," he said calmly. "You'll be served officially at the house. I just wanted you to have this copy first. Out of respect." Respect. The word was so cruel it almost made me laugh. He hadn't just gone behind my back. He had declared war. And he had made sure he had all his armies lined up before he fired the first shot. The drive home was silent. I sat in the passenger seat, staring out the window, the divorce papers feeling like they weighed 1,000 pounds on my lap. When we pulled into our driveway, my phone buzzed. It was my mom. I answered, expecting to cry and tell her everything. "How could you?" was the first thing she said. Her voice was shaking with anger and disappointment. "After everything he's done for you, how could you keep lying to him?" He had already called them. While I was sitting in that office reeling, he had been on the phone methodically cutting me off from my own family. He didn't just want to leave me. He wanted to make sure I had nowhere else to go. A few minutes later, a text came in from a number I didn't recognize. It was the AP's wife. Asterisk, I know everything. Stay away from my family. Asterisk, he had torched my life, and now he was salting the earth. I got out of the car and just stood in the driveway, unable to move. He walked past me toward the house, our house, which was now his fortress. I watched him go, and the full weight of what he had done crashed down on me. I wasn't just losing my husband. I was losing everything, my family, my home, my reputation. I was completely, utterly alone. A sob tore its way out of my chest, a raw animal sound of pure agony. My legs gave out, and I just collapsed onto the cold concrete of the driveway. I lay there and wept not, caring if the neighbors saw. There was nothing left to hide. I don't know how long I was out there. Eventually, he came back out. He stood over me for a moment, then he bent down and wrapped his arms around me, pulling me to my feet. He held me tight while I sobbed into his shirt, just like he had 100 times before. But this time was different. It wasn't comfort. It was a final goodbye. He held me until my sobs quieted, then he let me go, turned around and walked back inside, closing the door behind him. He left me standing in the ruins he had created. We lived like ghosts for the next few weeks. he slept in the guest room. We had a schedule for the kitchen and a custody arrangement for the kids, all within the same house. The silence was thick with anger and grief. We barely looked at each other. He was the cold, righteous victim. I was the disgraced liar. Then one night everything broke. The kids were at my parents who would barely speak to me. We were just two people in a big empty house full of memories. I found him in the living room just staring at a photo of us from our wedding day. The look on his face wasn't anger anymore. It was just loss. The same loss I felt. Without a word, I sat next to him. We didn't talk. We just sat there side by side in our shared misery. And then we were touching, a hand on an arm, a head on a shoulder. It wasn't about forgiveness. It was about loneliness. It was a desperate human need to not be completely alone in the dark. We ended up in our bedroom in our bed for the first time in months. It wasn't about love, or even passion. It was about grief. It was two people who knew every inch of each other's bodies, seeking a familiar comfort in the middle of a war. It was messy and sad and deeply confusing. The next morning, nothing was fixed. The divorce papers were still on the dresser. But something had changed. The anger had been replaced by a huge, gaping sadness. The war was over, and we were both just survivors standing in the rubble. That was when the real work started. Not the fake, performative work I had been doing before. This was the brutal, ugly honesty. I had to finally tell him everything. Not just about the affair, but about the loneliness that came before it. About how I felt like I had vanished. I had to show him the weak, scared, flawed person I had been hiding, not just from him, but from myself. I had to admit that I kept talking to the AP not to keep the affair going, but because I was terrified of facing the mess I'd made alone. He had to start being honest too. He had to admit that he had stopped seeing me, that he had been managing a household, not nurturing a wife. He had to face the part he played in the before. We called off the lawyers. We didn't tear up the divorce papers, but we put them away in a drawer. We went back to therapy, but this time there were no secrets. It was grueling. Some days it felt impossible. But for the first time we were fighting the same enemy, the brokenness between us instead of each other. He finally saw the woman who got lost, not just the monster who betrayed him. And I finally saw the husband who was hurt, not just the enemy who tried to destroy me. I don't know if we'll make it. I truly don't. The story isn't over. But this is the real beginning. Not the one where we pretended to fix things, but the one where we admitted everything was completely broken and we decided to see if we could build something new together from the wreckage.
Story Teen.
I know what he told you. I know how he framed it, how he made me out to be the villain who shattered his world while he was overseas serving his country. It's a simple story and it's effective. He's the hero, I'm the cheater. But our marriage didn't break because of one night in September. It was already broken. The truth is, he's the one who gave me the pieces. He likes to start the story in 2018 when he deployed. But our story starts years before that in a high school hallway. It starts with him cheating on me. I know, we were kids. Everyone says it doesn't count. But it does. It puts a crack in the foundation that you can never really fix. You can paint over it, pretend it isn't there, but it's always waiting for the first tremor to split everything wide open. I took him back. I loved him and I believed him when he said it was a mistake. But the trust never fully came back. It was gone. A year later, he was joining the Marines. We got married right after he finished boot camp. I was 18. It all happened so fast, a blur of a courthouse wedding and promises whispered between packing boxes. In his version, it was probably romantic. For me, looking back, it felt less like a celebration and more like he was locking me down before he left, staking a claim, making sure his property would be right where he left it when he came home. Then he was gone. And I was suddenly 19 in a new town near his base, with no friends, no family, and a husband I only knew through a crackly phone line. The loneliness was a physical thing. It was an ache in my chest that never went away. I was a Marine wife. That was my entire identity. People didn't ask my name, they asked for his rank. I stopped being a person and became an attachment. The fight started small. He'd get jealous if I mentioned going out for coffee with another wife from the base. He needed to know who, where, for how long. The calls became interrogations. Did I threaten to divorce him? Yes, more times than I can count. It's the one part of his story he gets completely right. But he never understood why. They weren't real threats. They were screams for help. I was drowning and I wanted him to see it. I wanted him to fight for me, to tell me not to go, to remind me why we got married in the first place. I wanted him to show me that I was more than just an obligation, a box he'd check before deployment. He never did. He'd just get angry, tell me I was being selfish, that he was the one in a war zone. He never got that I was in one too. A different, quieter kind. I tried to feel like myself again. I'd buy a new dress, something that made me feel pretty alive. I'd go out with the few friends I'd made. Sometimes I'd forget to put my ring back on after a shower. He'd see a picture on social media and the text would come immediately. Why aren't you wearing your ring? Who are you all dressed up for? He never once said, "You look beautiful." He saw a nice outfit and a missing ring as proof of my betrayal. I saw it as a desperate attempt not to disappear completely into the beige walls of our base housing. By September 2018, I felt like a ghost. The fighting was constant. We were just two angry, lonely people shouting at each other across an ocean. Levi wasn't part of some grand plan to hurt him. I wasn't looking for an affair. Levi was just there. An old friend from high school from before all of this. He was in town visiting family, and we reconnected online. Talking to him felt easy. He asked about my hobbies, my dreams, things my husband hadn't asked about in years. He saw me not just a Marine's wife. Going to his house was stupid. It was a moment of absolute weakness. I told myself it was just to talk, to feel normal for an hour. To sit on a couch with another human being and not feel like I was being watched or judged. We were just catching up. Nothing happened. But I knew even then that I was crossing a line I shouldn't. Then my phone buzzed with a notification. I glanced down and my heart stopped. A message from my husband. Underneath it was a map with a pulsing blue dot showing my exact location. My live iMessage location. I had sent it to him by accident. Thousands of miles away, he was watching me sit in another man's house. The blood drained from my face. I knew his rage. I'd heard it on the phone, felt the anger vibrating through the receiver. The thought of facing that, knowing there was nothing I could do to de-escalate it from the other side of the world, was terrifying. My phone started ringing. His name flashed on the screen. I answered, my hand shaking. His voice was cold, dangerously calm. "Where are you?" Panic took over. Logic went out the window. All I could think about was surviving the next 5 minutes, delaying the explosion I knew was coming. The first pathetic lie that fell out of my mouth was about my old iPad. "I'm at home," I stammered. That must be my old iPad. I left it at Levi's house a long time ago. I guess he turned it on. The service here is so bad it must be messing up the location. It was a terrible lie. A child's lie. But I was so desperate, so scared. There was a long silence on the other end of the line. It stretched for what felt like an eternity. I held my breath, waiting for the screaming. For a second I thought, maybe, just maybe, he bought it. He sounded tired when he finally spoke. "Okay," he said, his voice flat. "Okay, I have to go." And he hung up. I sat there, shaking the silence of the room, screaming in my ears. The immediate crisis was over, but I knew it wasn't the end. It was the beginning of something much, much worse. For a day, there was nothing. An unnerving radio silence from his end. I almost let myself believe I'd gotten away with it. Then my phone lit up. A new message from him. It wasn't words. It was a screenshot. A picture of my Instagram profile page. And right there under my name it said my account was still linked to Levi's. Underneath the screenshot, a single line of text from my husband appeared. "Explain this." My heart hammered against my ribs. A screenshot of my Instagram. How could I have been so stupid? It was an old link from years ago when the app first asked to connect accounts. It meant nothing, a digital ghost I hadn't even known was there. But to a man thousands of miles away, a man I had just bald-faced lied to, it was a smoking gun. Explain this. How do you explain a technical glitch to a hurricane? How do you say it's just a thing the app did to a man who now believes you're capable of anything I tried? I typed out frantic, rambling messages about how I didn't know how to unlink it, how it was an old setting, how it didn't mean anything. My words felt weak and pathetic even as I typed them. Each message I sent was met with cold, one-word replies. Sure. Okay. Right. He didn't believe me. Of course he didn't. The lie about the iPad had poisoned everything. From that moment on, I wasn't his wife anymore. I was a suspect. Every call became an interrogation. He'd ask the same questions over and over, just with different words. Who was I with? Who had I talked to? Why did I take 20 minutes to answer his text? He'd demand I FaceTime him to prove I was at home. His eyes scanning the background of the video for any clue that didn't fit. It was suffocating. He was fighting a war over there, but he was waging a whole other one on me. When he finally came home from deployment, the relief I thought I'd feel never came. The war just moved into our living room. He brought the detective with him. He'd pick up my phone when he thought I wasn't looking, scrolling through my messages, my call history. He'd ask casual-sounding questions about my day that were loaded with suspicion. If I mentioned a male coworker's name, his whole body would tense up. I was living on a knife's edge, constantly trying to prove my innocence for a crime I hadn't even committed. And for 2 years I held that line. I insisted nothing happened at Levi's house, because nothing physical had. I had gone there for a conversation, for a moment of connection in my crushing loneliness. That was the truth. But the bigger truth was that I had lied to him, panicked and scared, and that lie became the ghost that haunted our marriage. He couldn't let it go. It was a scab he had to keep picking at, convinced that if he just dug deep enough he'd find the infection he was so sure was festering underneath. We had our son. He was my world, the one bright, beautiful thing in the middle of all this ugliness. I looked at his little face, and I saw a reason to keep trying to hold our fractured family together. I thought if I just loved my husband enough, if I was patient enough, if I was transparent enough, we could get past it. I deleted my social media. I stopped going out with friends. I made my world as small as possible, hoping it would make him feel secure. But it didn't. His suspicion wasn't about my actions anymore. It was about his own pain. He was looking for a reason to justify the hurt he felt. And my lie was the perfect excuse. The fighting never stopped. It just got quieter, more bitter. It was death by 1,000 cuts. Every accusation, every suspicious glance, every time he brought up that day in September chipped away at me. I was exhausted. I was tired of defending myself, tired of walking on eggshells, tired of living with a man who looked at me like I was a stranger he couldn't trust. I was tired of being the villain in his story. The story that in his mind had only one possible ending. 2 years after he'd come home, we had another fight. It was the same one we'd had 100 times. It started with nothing, me getting a text from a friend, and spiraled into him accusing me of hiding things, of lying, of having a secret life. I just stared at him, my body feeling heavy and numb. I had no fight left in me. I just wanted it to be over. All of it. Later that night, as I lay in bed, listening to him breathe, I realized he would never let this go. He needed me to be the cheater. He needed me to confess to the story he'd already written in his head, because it was the only way his pain made sense to him. He couldn't face the fact that our marriage was broken long before that day, that he had handed me the first cracked piece himself. So I picked up my phone. My fingers moved across the screen, my thumb hovering over the send button. I just wanted peace. Even if it was the peace that comes from total destruction. I gave him what he wanted. I gave him the ammunition he'd spent 2 years searching for. I typed it out. You were right. I'm sorry. I cheated on you in September 2018. I hit send. The explosion was immediate, but this time I didn't feel scared. I didn't feel anything. It was almost a relief. I had finally surrendered. I let his version of the truth become the official story. He tells everyone he's broken now, and I know he is. I see it. What he doesn't see, what he will never admit, is that we are two broken people holding jagged pieces of the same shattered thing. He looks at the piece in my hand, the lie, the betrayal of going to another man's house, and calls me the one who destroyed everything. But he refuses to look at the piece in his own hand, the one he created all those years ago in that high school hallway. He doesn't understand that he broke the foundation first. He's the one who gave me the first deep cut, and he should not be surprised that eventually I bled.
Story 11.
I'm sure my ex-husband has told you all about me. I'm the monster, the cheating wife who blew up our perfect life for no reason. He probably told you how he gave me everything, how he worked so hard to build us a home, and how I threw it all away for a cheap thrill. He's good at telling that story. He's had a lot of practice. But he always leaves out the part where I disappeared long before I ever got in that car. We met when I was 19. He was almost 30, a man with a 5-year plan and a retirement portfolio. I was a kid working at a coffee shop with no plan other than what I was doing that weekend. He swept me off my feet. He was so sure about everything, and I thought that meant he was sure about me. I was wrong. He was sure about his plan, and I was just a piece he'd slotted into it. I wasn't a partner. I was the wife accessory. He bought a beautiful house in a nice neighborhood. He called it our house, but it was his. His office was the center of it. His rules were the law. I tried to make it a home. I'd pick out new curtains, and he'd say they were fine without looking up from his laptop. I'd cook his favorite dinner, and he'd eat while answering work emails. I was just background noise. My job was to keep the house running so he could focus on his important life as the breadwinner. He didn't see me. He saw a dependent. He'd hand me his credit card and tell me to buy something nice, like I was a child he needed to placate with a toy. The loneliness was a physical weight. I felt like I was suffocating in silence. For months I begged him to go to marriage counseling. I tried to tell him how I felt invisible, lost, more like his daughter than his wife. He'd just pat my hand and say, "We don't need to pay someone to listen to our problems. We're fine. You're just stressed." He wasn't listening. He was dismissing me. My only escape was my co-ed soccer team. He hated it. He thought I just went to get drunk with a bunch of guys. He wasn't entirely wrong about the drinking a few beers helped me forget that I was going home to a man who shared a bed with me but not a life. But it wasn't about the beer. It was about feeling like a person. On the field, I was part of a team. After the game at the bar, people talked times to times me. My teammate Buddy would ask how my day was and actually listen to the answer. They'd laugh at my dumb jokes. For 2 hours on a Wednesday night, I wasn't just my husband's wife. I was just me. And it felt incredible. The night it all fell apart was just another Wednesday. We had a game, and afterward the team was going to a party at someone's house. I was excited. It was something to look forward to. When I told my husband, his face went cold. He told me I couldn't go. "Not, I wish you wouldn't, but..." "You're not going." He said he wanted to spend the evening with me, that he'd had a long week. It sounded sweet on the surface, but the tone wasn't one of a partner asking for my time. It was a father grounding his kid. Something inside me just broke. All the resentment, all the times I'd felt unheard and controlled, it all just boiled over. So when Buddy dropped me off after the game and asked if I was sure I didn't want to go to the party, I just got back in his car. It wasn't about Buddy. It wasn't even about the party. It was a desperate, stupid, self-destructive way of screaming, "You don't own me!" I drank way too much, way too fast. I was chasing a feeling. I wanted to feel wanted. I wanted to feel time seen asterisk. And I was. The attention was like a drug. People were looking at me, laughing, with me touching my arm when I spoke. For a few hours I was the main character. It was messy and ugly. I had sex with Buddy. I slept with another guy on the team too. It was a blur of terrible decisions, one crashing into the next. It was a horrible way to feel alive, but it was the only way I could remember how. The next morning, the shame hit me like a physical blow. I crept downstairs, my head pounding, my stomach churning with guilt and cheap beer. He was already up sitting at the kitchen table with a coffee, staring at the wall. His eyes were like ice. He didn't yell. He just said, "Tell me what happened last night." How could I? How could I explain that I set our whole life on fire just because I felt small? I couldn't form the words. So I lied. I told him I went to the party, had too much to drink, and crashed on a couch. A sanitized, pathetic half-truth. He just stared at me for a long moment. Then he pushed his iPad across the table. Try again. My messages were open, my location history. Photos from the night before that someone had texted me. He had seen everything. My stomach dropped out. It wasn't just the cheating. It was the fact that he'd been watching me. The first words out of my mouth weren't, "I'm sorry." They were a pathetic, terrified whisper, "Are you leaving me?" My whole identity was so wrapped up in him that my first instinct was fear of being abandoned, not remorse for what I'd done. That's when I broke down completely. I told him everything, every single ugly detail. I cried until I couldn't breathe. I promised I'd do anything. I'd go to AA. I'd quit the team. I immediately found a marriage counselor, the one I'd been begging him to see for a year, and booked an appointment. I was ready to crawl through glass to fix what I had broken. We started going to therapy. I was trying, I really was. But he was a ghost. He was there, but he was gone. He'd sit next to me on the couch, but he wouldn't touch me. He slept in the guest room. The silence in the house was worse than it had ever been. I felt like I was poison. The only person who would even talk to me like I was still human was Buddy. He'd text to check on me. We'd meet for coffee. It was wrong, and I knew it was wrong, but he was a lifeline in an ocean of loneliness. It was a sick, pathetic comfort reaching for the person who helped me ruin everything, but I felt so completely alone. Then one night, after a terrible silent dinner, my husband came to me. He said he'd been thinking. He said maybe the reason we couldn't move forward was because there was too much baggage. He had a plan. He said we should get a divorce, a clean, simple, uncontested one, so we could wipe the slate clean. He painted this picture of us starting over, dating each other again, rebuilding from scratch without the weight of the past. He said it was the only way to save us. Looking at him, seeing a flicker of hope in his eyes, for the first time in weeks I actually believed him. I thought this was our chance. I told him I'd do whatever it took. He was so convincing. He laid out this whole roadmap for our healing, and I clung to it like a life raft. I was so desperate to believe that the man I married was still in there somewhere, buried under all the hurt. So I played my part. I became the most cooperative future ex-wife you've ever seen. I helped him get the paperwork together. When he said it would be faster and cheaper if we didn't use lawyers, I agreed without a second thought. Why would we need them? We were on the same team after all. I packed up my clothes and personal things, moving them into a storage unit he helped me rent. He told me it was a temporary step, a way to make the separation feel real, so our reunion would be even sweeter. Each box I taped up felt like a step toward fixing us. I spent days methodically taking myself out of the house we were supposed to share, smiling through my tears because I thought I was earning my way back to him. I was a ghost in my own home, tidying up the evidence of my existence, all while he watched with what I thought was sadness, but now I know was just patience. The day we signed the papers, he held my hand. He told me he was proud of me, that this was the hardest part, and that soon we could start building us again. I signed on every dotted line he pointed to. I waived my right to spousal support because he said it would just complicate things, and we didn't need that. We needed a clean break to get our clean start. I believed every single word. I was so blinded by the hope he was selling me that I couldn't see the truth right in front of my face. The divorce was finalized in a few weeks. It was all so clean, so efficient. I remember calling him that night, my voice shaking with a mix of fear and excitement. "So, it's done," I said. "When do we start over? When is our first date?" There was a long pause on the other end of the line. It was a different kind of silence than the one I had grown used to. This one was heavy, final. "We're not," he said. His voice was flat, empty of all the warmth he'd been faking for the past month. I couldn't process it. What are you talking about?" This was the plan. "Your plan." "No," he said, and I could almost hear the smirk in his voice. "This was always the plan. My plan." And then he dropped the other shoe. "Did you really think I didn't know you were still seeing Buddy? That you were still texting him, meeting him for coffee?" My blood ran cold. He sent me a screenshot. A text from me to Buddy from just the week before, asking if he wanted to meet up. He had more. He'd been tracking me the whole time, gathering a second round of evidence. All that time I thought I was working to fix our marriage, he was just building a better case against me. He spelled it out for me slowly, like he was talking to a child. The "let's start over" story was a lie. He knew that if he just divorced me outright, it could get messy. I might fight for the house for alimony. I was the cheated-on, neglected wife before I became the cheating wife. A good lawyer might have been able to argue that. But by getting me to continue my affair with Buddy, times after times I'd been caught while we were supposedly reconciling, he had what he needed. He had proof that I was unremorseful. "I needed you to be cooperative," he explained, his voice devoid of any emotion. "I needed you to sign the papers without a fight. And you did. You signed away everything. If you try to fight this now, I'll bring all of this to a judge. They won't see a heartbroken wife who made a mistake. They'll see a serial cheater who was sleeping with her affair partner while in marriage counseling. You won't get a dime." The realization hit me with the force of a physical blow. I hadn't just been divorced. I had been dismantled. He hadn't been a heartbroken husband. He had been a strategist. He used my hope, my guilt, and my desperation against me. Every tear he shed, every promise he made was a calculated move in his game. I was a problem to be managed, and he had managed it perfectly, ensuring he got a clean, cheap exit with no obligations. I was just a pawn he sacrificed to win. The weeks after that phone call are a blur. I was left with a car, a storage unit full of stuff, and an empty bank account. He had already removed me from everything. I had nothing. The shame was suffocating. It wasn't just about the cheating anymore. It was about being a fool. He had played me so completely, and I had let him because I was so desperate to be forgiven. But he was long gone, of course. He was a symptom of a sickness, not a cure, and once the marriage was officially dead, there was no reason for him to stick around. I was truly alone for the first time in my life. I got a cheap apartment and a waitressing job. Some nights I would just sit on the floor and cry, not for the man I lost, but for the girl who was so lost she let a man define her entire existence. A few months later, just for something to do, I started talking to people online. Not dating, just talking. I met a man from Tennessee. He was kind. He was a truck driver, and he would call me from the road. He didn't have a 5-year plan or a stock portfolio. He just had stories about the road and a laugh that made me feel warm. He asked me questions about my day and actually listened to the answers. He didn't see me as a project or a broken thing to be fixed. He just saw me. After a few months, he asked me to come visit him. I packed a single suitcase and drove the 9 hours to his small town in Tennessee. I never left. We got married 6 months later at the courthouse. It wasn't a big production. It was just us. It was real. I'm pregnant now. And when I feel the baby kick, I'm not scared. For the first time, I feel like I'm building a life, not just living in someone else's. My ex-husband took my house, my money, and my dignity. He thinks he won. But he left me with one thing myself. And I'm finally learning who that is. He can tell his story and paint me as the villain. But what he did, the cold and calculated way he manipulated my heart to get what he wanted, that was a different kind of evil. I set our life on fire in a moment of desperate, drunken madness. He quietly and patiently burned mine to the ground so he could walk away without any smoke on his clothes.